Hey there, tonight we're diving into how ancient Greeks survived Spartan training, where what you're about to discover is the surprising endurance of young warriors in a world where discipline was more relentless than any myth. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. You're 7 years old, and congratulations, you've just become the property of the state of Sparta. No, really, the ancient Greeks believed in taking child rearing to the extreme. Forget about Saturday morning cartoons or sleepovers at a friend's house. Your new normal involves leaving your family and entering the agoge, Sparta's legendary training regime. And when I say legendary, I mean it in both senses. Part myth, part reality check. Spartan society was obsessed with the idea of creating the perfect warrior. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just about mastering the art of war. It was about survival, about turning you into someone who could endure hardship, hunger, and a complete lack of personal space. You could say it was a bit like a military boot camp, but with fewer creature comforts and more existential dread. Imagine being taken from your family at such a tender age and plopped into a world where comfort is a dirty word. Your new home, a barracks shared with a bunch of other kids who are probably just as terrified as you are. Your meals, let's just say they make prison food look like a Michelin-starred feast. Boiled pig's blood, vinegar and salt, also known as black broth, was a staple. Yummy, right? The agoge was less about coddling and more about toughening you up. You'd be taught to read and write, sure, but the real lessons were in stealth, cunning, and resilience. You were encouraged, no, required, to steal food. But if you got caught, punishment was swift and severe. The lesson here, not don't steal, but don't get caught. It's like an early version of Survivor, but with a lot more at stake than $1 million prize. Now, the myth of Spartan invincibility is a bit like believing in unicorns. Sure, it's nice to think about, but reality is a tad grimmer. Spartans were trained to be tough, yes, but they weren't invincible. They were human, after all. Their training was designed not just to create soldiers who could fight, but men who could endure the brutalities of life. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine the pressure of knowing that any failure could lead to disgrace, not just for you, but for your entire family. Families, speaking of which, were effectively split. Your parents had to watch as you were taken away, knowing they had little say in the matter. It's a wrenching thought, especially when you consider that family ties were supposed to be strong in Greek culture. But in Sparta, the state's needs came first. The psychological impact of such an upbringing can't be overstated. Kids were conditioned to suppress emotions, to show no fear, no pain. Crying, forget it. You'd be marked, shamed, and possibly punished. In a society where vulnerability was seen as weakness, you learned quickly to put on a brave face, even if you were terrified inside. It's tempting to romanticize this lifestyle as noble and glorious, but the truth is far more sobering. The cost of creating these so-called perfect warriors was high. Many kids didn't survive the agoge. Illness, injury, and even death were not uncommon. But those who did make it through were forever changed, molded into the Spartan ideal of discipline and loyalty. Unless you think this was a choice, it wasn't. Participation in the agoge was compulsory. Refusal wasn't an option unless you were aiming for a one-way ticket to social pariah status. Even the kings of Sparta had to go through it. Talk about equal opportunity misery. So yeah, while the idea of invincible Spartan warriors might sound cool in a Zack Snyder film, the reality was a lot messier, a lot harder, and a whole lot more human. It's a reminder that behind every legendary story, there's a face, a life, and often a whole lot of suffering. Welcome to the real Sparta, where surviving was the ultimate victory. But hold up, before we get too swept away by visions of ripped abs and heroic last stands, let's pivot to the real engine behind the Spartan juggernaut, the Helots. Now, if you've heard of Helots at all, you might picture them as the background extras in the epic story of Spartan valor. But these weren't just nameless peons. They were the backbone of the Spartan economy, which, if we're being honest, was less like a well-oiled machine and more like a rickety cart held together with duct tape and desperation. Let me paint you a picture. You're in Sparta, circa 5th century BCE. You're not a Spartan warrior, though. Instead, you're more likely one of the Helots, the oppressed majority who did all the heavy lifting, literally and figuratively. The Helots were essentially state-owned serfs, tied to the land, and forced to hand over half of their produce to their Spartan overlords. This wasn't just a bad deal. It was economic servitude with a side of existential dread. Imagine toiling away in the fields, knowing that your hard work fuels the very system that keeps you subjugated. It's like being stuck on a treadmill, but instead of getting fitter, you're just making someone else look good. The Helot system was critical because it allowed the Spartans, the so-called elite warriors, to focus on what they did best: training, fighting, and perfecting the art of looking fierce in red cloaks. The Spartans weren't farmers or artisans. Nope, they left all those mundane chores to the Helots while they concentrated on expanding their abdominal muscles and sharpening their spears. In essence, the Helots kept the Spartan war machine humming along, much like the unsung roadies who make sure the rock stars have their guitars in tune and their stage lights just right. But don't be fooled into thinking that the Helots were just passive participants in this socio-economic circus. Far from it. The constant fear of Helot uprisings was as much a part of Spartan life as the agoge. The Spartans lived in a state of perpetual paranoia, always looking over their shoulders. In fact, Sparta declared war on the Helots annually. Yes, you heard that right, just to keep them in check. This yearly declaration wasn't about military strategy. It was a psychological tool to justify acts of violence and maintain control through terror. It's like they invented a yearly purge long before Hollywood thought to make it fashionable. So, while the Spartan warriors strutted around like peacocks, the truth was they were constantly on edge, aware that their very way of life was built on a precarious foundation of forced labor and fear. And if that doesn't take some of the shine off the whole noble warrior narrative, I don't know what will. Their entire societal structure was a house of cards, with Helots as the lower tiers, and the Spartans desperately hoping no one sneezed too hard. And let's talk about the economics for a moment. The Helots weren't just an oppressed labor force. They were an economic necessity. The Spartans had a peculiar relationship with wealth, one that would make any Wall Street broker weep into his stock portfolio. They didn't use coins until later in their history, preferring instead an iron currency that was bulky and inconvenient. You could say it took the concept of cash flow to a whole new level of literalism. Imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread with a chunk of iron the size of a brick. A Spartan warrior might have been able to bench press it, but good luck fitting that in your wallet. This aversion to wealth accumulation and their reliance on Helots made Sparta an outlier in the Greek world. Other city-states were busy trading, getting richer, and building impressive cityscapes, while Sparta clung to its austere and martial ways. But this economic quirkiness came at a cost. The Spartan state was fragile, and its dependence on Helot labor was its Achilles heel. The Helots outnumbered the Spartans, sometimes by as much as 7-1, which meant any significant uprising could potentially topple the entire Spartan society. Talk about living on the edge. The Spartans' obsession with maintaining control over the Helots even influenced their military tactics. They didn't just train for warfare against external enemies. They also prepared for potential internal conflicts. The annual Crypteia, a sort of secret police operation, was as much about terrorizing the Helots as it was about training young Spartans in the art of stealth and brutality. Spartan youths were encouraged to sneak out at night and kill Helots as a demonstration of their loyalty and skill. It was a grim rite of passage, reinforcing a culture of fear and control. Kind of makes your high school initiation rituals seem like a walk in the park, doesn't it? Now, if you're thinking that the Spartans were caught in a vicious cycle of their own making, you'd be spot on. Their rigid social structure and dependency on Helots meant they were in a constant state of tension between preserving their way of life and dealing with the ever-present threat of revolt. It was a delicate balance, one that required harsh measures and an unwavering commitment to their militaristic ethos. So while the Spartan warrior might be remembered for his bravery and discipline on the battlefield, his life back home was anything but serene. This brings us back to the romanticized image of the Spartan noble warrior. Sure, they were brave, but they were also deeply flawed, trapped in a system that they couldn't escape. It's easy to get swept up in the Hollywood version of Sparta, the heroic last stands and the valor in battle. But beneath that glossy exterior was a society riddled with inequality and fear. The Spartans weren't just warriors. They were humans grappling with the complexities of power, control, and survival. Their story is a potent reminder that behind every legend, there are layers of reality waiting to be uncovered. So, as we peel back the layers of Spartan society, remember that the mighty warriors of Sparta were as much a product of their economic and social circumstances as they were of their rigorous training. And while the tales of their heroics continue to inspire, the truth reveals a more complex and ultimately more human narrative. Keep that in mind as we dive deeper into the world of ancient Greece, where the line between myth and reality is as fluid as the waters of the Aegean Sea. So, as we navigate the labyrinthine complexities of Spartan society, let's pivot from the Helots and shift our gaze to another equally fascinating, yet often misunderstood group, Spartan women. While the men were busy honing their skills in the agoge, or staring down Helots with paranoid intensity, Spartan women were, surprisingly, enjoying a level of autonomy that would make their Athenian sisters green with envy. But before we start celebrating this as some ancient feminist utopia, let's unpack the reality behind the myth. First off, Spartan women had one job that was more crucial than any other: producing strong, healthy offspring. This wasn't just a casual suggestion. It was the cornerstone of the Spartan state's survival strategy. The whole society was geared towards perpetuating its military supremacy, and that supremacy needed a constant supply of robust soldiers. In a way, you could say Spartan women were the original CrossFit moms, but with considerably higher stakes and fewer Instagram followers. Now, unlike their female counterparts in other Greek city-states who were often confined to the domestic sphere, Spartan women were out and about, managing estates and wielding considerable economic power. You see, while the men were off at war or training for it, someone had to keep the farms running and the Helots in line. And who better than the women who had been raised on tales of Spartan discipline and resilience? They weren't just sitting idly by. They were the glue holding the whole Spartan machine together. Imagine being both a CEO and a drill sergeant rolled into one, with a dash of farmer thrown in for good measure. But wait, there's more. Spartan women were also expected to participate in physical training. Yes, you heard that right. They exercised, and not just for fun or health, but because it was believed that strong women would produce strong children. The idea was that if you could wrestle and run like a warrior, your offspring would inherit those same Herculean genes. Think of it as ancient eugenics with a side of crunches. These women were no shrinking violets. They were as tough as the nails they probably hammered into their own roofs. However, let's not get too carried away with the idea of Spartan women as liberated paragons of ancient feminism. Sure, they had more freedom than, say, the women of Athens, who were often sequestered indoors like rare orchids. But Spartan women's freedom was utilitarian, a means to an end rather than an end in itself. Their primary duty was to the state, produce and raise future warriors, a societal contract that left little room for personal aspirations outside of this role. Moreover, while Spartan women could own and manage property, a rarity in the Greek world, their economic power was closely tied to their reproductive capabilities. A woman's worth was often measured by the strength and number of her sons, and those who failed to produce offspring could find themselves ostracized. In a society obsessed with physical perfection, even childbirth was a competitive sport, with women under immense pressure to deliver, not just babies, but future defenders of the realm. This brings us to one of the most persistent myths about Spartan women, their supposed empowerment. It's true they wielded more influence than women in many other ancient cultures, but this influence was circumscribed by the needs of a militaristic state. Their freedoms were practical, not ideological. The economic and social autonomy they enjoyed wasn't about gender equality. It was about ensuring that every cog in the Spartan machine functioned smoothly. It's a bit like giving the keys to the kingdom, but only as long as you remember who really owns the castle. Even their education was tailored to the state's needs. Spartan girls were taught to read and write, a privilege not extended to many of their Greek contemporaries. But before we start handing out feminist gold stars, consider this. Literacy was yet another tool to prepare them for their roles in managing estates and producing the next generation of soldiers. Education wasn't about fostering intellectual curiosity. It was about efficiency and utility. Let's not forget the social pressures they faced. Marital expectations were steep, with young women often married off by the time they were in their late teens. Their weddings, like everything else in Spartan life, were peculiar affairs. In a bizarre twist of ceremony, a bride would have her hair cut short and be dressed in men's clothing before being carried off to her new husband's home. This ritual was less about romance and more about a symbolic transition into her new life role. It's safe to say Cupid wasn't shooting any arrows at these nuptials. Nevertheless, Spartan women did manage to carve out a space where they could exert influence, albeit within tight constraints. They weren't just silent partners in the Spartan project. They were active participants. Their role was as integral to the Spartan war machine as the men who wielded the spears. So while they might not have been warriors on the battlefield, they were warriors of a different kind, fighting societal expectations and managing the domestic front with a steely resolve. And yet, for all their strength, Spartan women were still bound by the same rigid societal norms that dictated every aspect of Spartan life. Their lives were a paradox, empowered yet constrained, respected yet objectified, autonomous yet controlled. They were the unsung heroines of Sparta, the ones who made sure the business of war could go on uninterrupted. As we peel back the layers of Spartan society, we see that the story of Spartan women is a complex tapestry of power and subjugation, autonomy and obligation. Their lives were shaped by the same forces that crafted the legendary Spartan warriors, forces that demanded unwavering loyalty to the state above all else. So the next time you hear about the empowered women of Sparta, remember that their power came at a price, one that was paid in duty and sacrifice. And with that, we leave Spartan women to their endless balancing act, juggling freedom with duty, power with sacrifice. As we look ahead, we'll continue to unravel the myriad threads that make up this extraordinary society, revealing both its legendary allure and its sobering reality. Stay tuned, because the story of Sparta is far from over. So, we've explored the inside scoop on Spartan women, but now, let's march over to the political playground of ancient Greece, where Sparta was more than a muscled-up city-state. It was a heavyweight in the Hellenic ring. Picture a reality show, but with more drama, fewer roses, and a lot more spears. Sparta's political landscape was as complex as its famed phalanx formation, and its relationships with other Greek city-states were anything but straightforward. First up, let's talk about alliances. Sparta was part of the Peloponnesian League, a coalition of city-states in the Peloponnese Peninsula, designed to counterbalance the power of Athens and its Delian League. Think of it as the ancient Greek version of forming your own high school, clique to rival the popular kids. But don't be fooled into thinking this was a conveyor circle of mutual admiration. The League was more like a collection of frenemies, bound by necessity rather than love. The main perk for Sparta, it allowed them to flex their military muscles without the distraction of pesky domestic disputes. Now, why did these alliances matter? Because they set the stage for the Peloponnesian War, 431-404 BCE, a conflict so epic it makes modern geopolitical tensions look like a board game of Risk. Sparta and Athens were the Beyoncé and Jay-Z of ancient Greece, ubiquitous, influential, and constantly in the headlines. Except instead of crazy in love, it was more crazy in war. This wasn't just a battle for territory. It was a clash of ideologies. Athens, with its bustling democracy and economic prowess, versus Sparta, the militaristic powerhouse that shunned wealth like the plague. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before the Peloponnesian War, Sparta was already flexing its military might during the Greco-Persian Wars. Enter the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE, the grand stage for one of history's most legendary last stands. Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, plus a few thousand other Greeks who often get left out of the story, made their mark here. Thermopylae was less about victory and more about valor. The Spartans' ultimate sacrifice became a timeless rallying cry for Greek unity against the Persian juggernaut. However, let's strip away the cinematic sheen. While Thermopylae is often framed as an underdog story, it wasn't exactly a fairy tale. The Spartan stand was heroic, sure, but also strategic. They were buying time for the rest of Greece to muster a defense. And while their bravery is undisputed, the battle also highlighted Sparta's limitations. Their army was formidable, but not invincible. The Persians eventually outflanked them, proving that even the best-laid plans can crumble when someone decides to take the back door. Speaking of limitations, let's dive into the myth of Spartan superiority. Yes, they were exceptional warriors, but this prowess masked a host of vulnerabilities. Sparta's rigid military focus came at a cost: cultural and economic stagnation. While Athens was busy inventing democracy and constructing architectural marvels like the Parthenon, Sparta stuck to its austere ways, content with iron bars for currency and a severe lack of infrastructure. It's like choosing to live in a tent while your neighbors build skyscrapers. Sure, you have freedom, but you've also got a leaky roof when it rains. Moreover, Sparta's social structure was a ticking time bomb. The constant fear of Helot revolts, coupled with the need to maintain military dominance, kept the Spartans in a perpetual state of alert. This wasn't just paranoia, it was a survival mechanism. Ironically, the very system that made them strong also kept them vulnerable. Talk about living on the edge, literally. Now, let's not forget the diplomatic charm, or lack thereof. Sparta wasn't exactly known for its soft power. Their idea of negotiation often involved a spear and a stern look. Diplomatic finesse was not their strong suit, and this occasionally backfired. Their Spartan bluntness was legendary, but it didn't help them win hearts and minds. They were respected, feared even, but not particularly loved. It was a bit like being the unpopular kid in school who everyone is too scared to mess with, but no one invites to the party. The Peloponnesian War is a prime example of how Sparta's military might was a double-edged sword. Initially, they gained ground, exploiting Athens' strategic missteps. But war is an expensive business, and Sparta's economic model wasn't built for prolonged conflict. They had to rely on Persian gold to fund their naval operations. Talk about irony, considering they were fighting against Persian influence in Greece in the first place. It's like borrowing money from the school bully to buy candy, only to realize the candy shop is closed. And here's the kicker. Even after winning the war, Sparta couldn't hold on to its gains. Their victory was Pyrrhic, a temporary triumph that left them stretched thin and exposed. They found themselves playing a game of whack-a-mole with rebellious allies and internal strife. The very rigidity that defined them also made them inflexible in a rapidly changing Greek world. The Spartans could conquer, but governance was a different beast altogether. Sparta's story is one of contrasts: strength and fragility, discipline and inflexibility. The Spartans were like a finely tuned weapon, devastating in battle, but ill-suited for the subtleties of diplomacy and economic expansion. Their society was a marvel of military engineering, yet it was also a cautionary tale about the dangers of putting all your eggs in one basket, especially if that basket is made of iron and weighs a ton. As we journey further into Spartan history, keep in mind that the legend often overshadows the reality. Behind the iconic image of the Spartan warrior lies a complex web of political, social, and economic factors that shaped their world. The Spartans may have been masters of war, but they were also captives of their own creation, bound by a system that demanded much and gave little in return. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of Spartan history, where every thread tells a story of power, struggle, and the relentless pursuit of perfection, no matter the cost. As the sun set on the era of Spartan dominance, it became increasingly clear that the very disciplines that had once propelled Sparta to its zenith were also hastening its decline. Imagine a society so tightly wound by its own rigor that it forgot one crucial rule of survival: adapt or perish. The Spartan warrior might have been a paragon of discipline and strength, but even the toughest armor has its chinks, especially when it's forged from the brittle iron of social and economic rigidity. The decline of Sparta reads like a lesson in the dangers of overspecialization. While other Greek city-states like Athens diversified their economies and cultures, Sparta doubled down on its martial identity. Their economy rested precariously on the fractured backs of the Helots and the inefficient use of iron currency. Imagine trying to run a modern economy on monopoly money, and you'll get the idea. Without a robust economic engine, Sparta was like a one-hit wonder band trying to survive in a rapidly evolving music industry. Great for a while, but inevitably left behind. A pivotal moment in the unraveling of Sparta came after the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, where the Thebans handed them a defeat that sent shockwaves across the Greek world. The Spartans, once considered invincible, were left reeling. It was as if the world suddenly realized that the emperor had no clothes, or in this case, the warrior had no shield. The Theban general Epaminondas didn't just beat the Spartans, he shattered the myth of their invincibility. The defeat at Leuctra was a wake-up call, but one that the Spartans were ill-prepared to heed. Economically, the Spartans were stuck in a time warp. While other Greek states were busy minting coins, engaging in trade, and expanding their mercantile empires, Sparta clung to its iron bars like a toddler to a security blanket. The Spartan aversion to wealth accumulation, while noble in its rejection of greed, left them vulnerable to economic stagnation. It's hard to build a thriving state on warrior ideals alone when everyone else is out there inventing philosophy and democracy. But let's talk about the social system, the infamous agoge. The very mechanism designed to churn out elite warriors was also a societal straitjacket. The rigid training regime left little room for innovation or personal development outside of military prowess. The Spartan education system was a masterclass in creating soldiers, but a disaster for cultivating thinkers, artists, or innovators. In a world that was rapidly evolving, Sparta's stubborn adherence to its traditional ways was like trying to win a marathon with a sprint mentality. And what about the Helots, those unsung linchpins of the Spartan economy? The constant fear of uprising meant that a significant portion of Spartan resources and manpower was perpetually diverted towards keeping them in check. The paradox of Spartan society was that the very people they depended on for economic stability were also their greatest threat. It's as if the Spartans were walking a tightrope, with the Helots shaking the wire beneath them. As Sparta's influence waned, the cracks in their once formidable facade became ever more apparent. The societal rigidity that had once been their strength now turned into shackles. The Spartan system was like a beautifully crafted vase, impressive but fragile, and unable to withstand the pressures of change. The decline of Sparta wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a slow, inevitable resignation to irrelevance. Yet, despite their decline, the legacy of Spartan training and discipline continues to captivate the imagination. Why do we romanticize a society that was so clearly flawed? Perhaps it's the allure of the warrior ethos, the idea of a life dedicated to duty and honor. Or maybe it's the stark simplicity of the Spartan lifestyle, a counterpoint to our own complex and often chaotic existence. The image of the stoic Spartan, standing firm against insurmountable odds, resonates in a world where certainty is rare, and valor often feels like an antiquated luxury. But let's not get carried away by the myth while ignoring the man behind the mask. The cost of Spartan discipline was high. The emotional toll on those who survived the agoge, the societal pressures that bore down on every citizen, and the constant threat of violence and revolt left scars that no amount of glory could erase. The Spartan legacy is a reminder that the pursuit of perfection often comes at a cost too great to bear. In the end, the story of Sparta is a cautionary tale about the dangers of an inflexible society. It's a narrative that warns against the perils of placing too high a value on one aspect of life at the expense of all others. The Spartans may have been masters of war, but their rigid adherence to tradition left them vulnerable to the winds of change. And while their story continues to inspire, it also serves as a poignant reminder that strength without adaptability is like a sword without a hilt, impressive, but ultimately unwieldy. So, as you drift off, filled with newfound knowledge, remember the Spartans not just for their legendary last stands and chiseled physiques, but for the complex tapestry of human triumph and tragedy that their history represents. They were warriors, yes, but also humans, caught in the relentless march of time and change. And in that, there's a lesson for all of us, tucked away like a whispered secret in the annals of history. In the world of ancient empires, Persia was the equivalent of that overachieving cousin who not only aced every subject, but also mastered the art of stunning architecture while at it. Welcome to the Achaemenid Empire, a powerhouse that emerged from the Iranian plateau around 550 BCE, like a surprise guest at a party who ends up becoming the life of it. Founded by Cyrus the Great, this empire quickly became the largest the world had ever seen, stretching from the Balkans to the Indus Valley. That's roughly 5 million square kilometers of dominance, about the size of 32 modern-day Irans, in case you're keeping score. Now, you might be wondering, What made these ancient Persians such architectural rock stars? Well, imagine an empire so grandiose that it needed a capital to match. Hence, Persepolis was born. More than just a collection of fancy rocks, Persepolis was the ceremonial capital that screamed, "We mean business." It wasn't just an ancient version of the Vegas Strip, although it did boast its own kind of opulence. This was a place where every stone block had a story, and every column was a testament to the engineering feats of the time. Persepolis was built under the watchful eyes of Darius I, who reigned from 522 BCE to 486 BCE. He wanted a city that not only reflected the empire's wealth, but was also a symbol of its unity and diversity. Picture a multicultural extravaganza with stone carvings depicting representatives from all over the empire bringing tributes. It was like a United Nations meeting, but with more gold and less bureaucracy. The construction of Persepolis would have been a logistical nightmare today, but back then it was a marvel of ancient engineering. Massive stone terraces were erected, some measuring over 450 by 300 meters, and adorned with towering columns reaching up to 20 meters high. These weren't just any columns. They were intricately carved with the precision of a Renaissance sculptor who had somehow time-traveled back a couple of millennia. The workforce at Persepolis was as diverse as the empire itself. Craftsmen from Egypt, Babylon, Greece, and India all contributed their skills. This wasn't just a case of get the cheapest labor possible. It was an international collaboration that would make the United Nations envious. And speaking of cost, it's estimated that the construction of Persepolis set the empire back a cool couple of $100 million by today's standards. That's right, folks. Darius, I was throwing down cash like it was confetti at a royal wedding. But it wasn't just about the bling. The architectural layout of Persepolis was strategically designed to convey power and control. The grand stairways, which were broad enough to accommodate crowds without bottlenecking, led up to the Apadana, the main audience hall. This was where the king would receive ambassadors and dignitaries. It was a space so majestic that it could accommodate up to 10,000 people at once. Think of it as the ancient world's equivalent of a TED talk venue, but with more spears and less PowerPoint. However, here's where we start debunking some myths. While Persepolis might seem like a palace built for the sole purpose of flaunting wealth, it was primarily a ceremonial hub rather than a seat of government. Imagine building a city just for red carpet events, only without the paparazzi. The real day-to-day governing happened in places like Susa or Ecbatana, which were more practical in terms of location and resources. Despite its grandeur, Persepolis wasn't invincible. Fast forward to 330 BCE and enter Alexander the Great, a name that could send shivers down the spine of Persian nobility. After his conquest, Alexander torched Persepolis, allegedly as an act of revenge for the burning of Athens. Whether it was really about revenge or just an unfortunate case of ancient pyromania is still up for debate. Either way, the destruction of Persepolis marked the end of an era, leaving behind ruins that still managed to capture the imagination of historians and tourists alike. So, what's the takeaway here? Persepolis was no ordinary city. It was a statement, a declaration of the Achaemenid Empire's might, its cultural diversity, and its architectural prowess. It was a place where politics, art, and engineering converged to create something truly extraordinary. And while the city may now be a shadow of its former glory, its legacy lives on, reminding us that even in the ancient world, the Persians knew how to throw an impressive party. Now, while Persepolis might have been the architectural equivalent of a mic drop, the real unsung heroes of the Persian Empire were the Khanats. These underground channels were like the VIP backstage passes of ancient engineering, essential, ingenious, and way cooler than any aqueduct you'd find above ground. If you've ever wondered how the Persians managed to turn arid landscapes into lush agricultural expanses, the secret lies beneath your feet, quite literally. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of these subterranean wonders. A Khanat is essentially a gently sloping tunnel that taps into the water table in a way that would make modern environmentalists nod in approval. The brilliance lies in its simplicity. By harnessing gravity, these channels transported water from higher elevations down to where it was needed without the need for pumps or any other mechanical wizardry. We're talking about a system that dates back to at least 1000 BCE, with some sources suggesting it might have been in use as early as 3000 BCE. So, you could say the Persians were well ahead of the curve when it came to sustainable water management. Building a Qanat was no small feat, required a workforce skilled in both engineering and a bit of spelunking. Think of it as a combination of construction worker and cave explorer. The process involved digging a series of vertical shafts down to the water table and connecting them with a horizontal tunnel. These shafts, spaced every 20 to 35 meters apart, could plunge as deep as 60 meters. That's taller than a 20-story building, all dug by hand. The whole system could stretch for kilometers, with some Qanats reaching up to 70 kilometers in length. If that doesn't impress you, I don't know what will. From an economic standpoint, the Qanats were game changers. They allowed the Persians to cultivate crops and sustain urban centers in regions that would otherwise be barren. This wasn't just about feeding people, it was about fueling an empire. Agriculture was the backbone of the Persian economy, and without water, you might as well have been trying to grow crops on the moon. By ensuring a steady water supply, Qanats supported the growth of cities like Susa and Ecbatana, which were crucial to the empire's political and economic structure. It's no exaggeration to say that without these channels, the Persian Empire might not have reached its historic heights. Now, let's bust a few myths. Some might think that Qanats were purely a Persian invention, but the truth is a bit more nuanced. While the Persians perfected the technique and spread it across their vast empire, they likely drew inspiration from earlier civilizations, such as those in Mesopotamia. However, the Persians were the ones who turned it into an art form, a key feature of their imperial infrastructure. By the time Alexander the Great rolled through, Qanats were so essential that he made sure to keep them intact. After all, even a conqueror needs water. But it wasn't all roses and flowing streams. Maintaining a Qanat was a labor-intensive and costly endeavor. Regular maintenance was crucial to prevent blockages and ensure the tunnels didn't collapse. This required a dedicated workforce, often referred to as mukenes, who passed down their skills through generations. It was a job that required both technical knowledge and a bit of bravery. Imagine crawling through dark, narrow tunnels with nothing but a torch and a prayer. The costs involved in building and maintaining these systems were significant, which meant only the wealthiest landowners or the state could afford to undertake such projects. It's a reminder that even ancient innovation came with its price tags and class divisions. So why does any of this matter today? Well, the legacy of the Qanat system is still visible. In places like Iran, Afghanistan, and parts of North Africa, these ancient channels are still in use, a testament to their durability and the ingenuity of their creators. They represent a form of resilience and adaptation that many modern societies could learn from, especially as we face increasing water scarcity. In a world obsessed with technological solutions, sometimes the best answers are buried in the past. And let's not forget the human element. The Qanats tell a story of cooperation and community, of entire villages working together to ensure their survival. They were not just engineering marvels. They were lifelines that connected people across the harsh desert landscape. It's a narrative that combines the romance of innovation with the harsh realities of geography and climate. Proof that even in ancient times, humanity's greatest achievements often came from working with, rather than against, the forces of nature. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Persian Qanats, let's leave the ground open for the next chapter in our exploration of ancient Persian ingenuity. We've only just scratched the surface of what this empire achieved, and there are plenty more layers to uncover. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tapestry of history, one thread at a time. Now that we've unearthed the ancient wonders beneath our feet, it's time to look up and marvel at the grandeur towering above the Persian landscape. Enter the Apadana Palace, the crown jewel of Persepolis, which, contrary to popular belief, wasn't just a playground for kings dripping in gold like ancient bling-bling wrappers. Nope, the Apadana was a lot more than gaudy excess. It was a calculated display of power and unity, a stone-cold architectural mic drop from the Achaemenid Empire. The Apadana Palace wasn't merely a building. It was the beating heart of ceremonial Persia, a place where the empire flexed its metaphorical muscles. Constructed under Darius I and completed by his successor Xerxes I, around 515 BCE to 500 BCE, the palace was a masterpiece of design and function. Picture a vast hall supported by 72 columns, each soaring over 20 meters high, quite the architectural flex. We're talking about a space so grand it could comfortably host 10,000 guests, which is like fitting an entire small-town population under one roof. It was a place where the empire's subject nations gathered to pay homage, a kind of ancient diplomatic mixer with a side of Persian pomp and circumstance. But let's dial down the glamour and take a closer look. Yes, the Apadana was impressive, but it wasn't just a backdrop for royal selfies. The artistry found in its carvings and reliefs told the story of an empire that valued diversity and unity. Stone reliefs depicted representatives from across the empire bringing gifts. Think of it as a multicultural parade captured in limestone. This wasn't just a vanity project. It was propaganda in its purest form, a visual representation of the empire's vast reach and its ability to bring disparate cultures under one harmonious umbrella. And speaking of those carvings, let's take a moment to appreciate the craftsmanship involved. The reliefs are so detailed that you can almost see the veins in the arms of the stone figures. This was art with a purpose, designed to impress and intimidate. The meticulous attention to detail was not just about aesthetics. It was a statement of the empire's ability to harness artistic talent from its many provinces. Egyptian motifs mingled with Babylonian styles, and Greek influences blended seamlessly with Persian traditions. It was a veritable United Nations of ancient art, showing that while the empire was vast, it was also interconnected. Now, let's switch gears and talk about the economic muscle behind all this splendor. Building the Apadana wasn't cheap. Darius I and Xerxes didn't just pluck gold coins off trees. They bankrolled this colossal project with a complex system of taxation and tributes. The empire's wealth flowed from its fertile lands and trade routes stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. This wasn't just an exercise in showing off wealth. It was about solidifying control through economic power. By investing in such an awe-inspiring structure, the Persian kings were making a statement. We control one of the wealthiest empires on the planet, and we're here to stay. But was it all just a grand facade? Some might argue that the Apadana was little more than an elaborate stage for power plays. Sure, it served as the setting for grandiose meetings and royal receptions, but beneath the opulence lay a keen understanding of governance and control. The architecture itself was a tool of diplomacy, designed to project stability and strength. It was an empire's way of saying, look at what we've built. We command respect and loyalty, not through fear alone, but through the shared prosperity of our lands. Of course, with all this grandeur, myths abound. One popular tale suggests that the Persian kings lived in a state of perpetual luxury, drowning in their opulence. In reality, while they did enjoy the perks of power, the emphasis was on strategic governance rather than hedonistic excess. The real work of ruling a sprawling empire happened elsewhere, in more practical locations like Susa or Ecbatana, which served as administrative hubs. The Apadana, with all its splendor, was more about the ritualistic display of power than the day-to-day running of an empire. So, what's the takeaway from this architectural saga? The Apadana wasn't just an ancient version of a luxury resort. It was a symbol of the political and cultural might of the Achaemenid Empire. It was a testament to the Persians' ability to craft a cohesive narrative through stone and art, a narrative that spoke of unity, power, and the enduring legacy of a civilization that once stood at the pinnacle of the ancient world. As we wrap up our exploration of the Apadana Palace, remember that this is just one piece of the Persian puzzle. We've seen how architecture served not just as a tool of aesthetic pleasure, but as a crucial element of political strategy. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the layers of ancient Persian ingenuity, because there's plenty more to discover about this remarkable empire that knew how to blend politics with artistry, creating not just buildings, but legacies that would stand the test of time. And speaking of legacies that stand the test of time, let's hit the road and talk about the famous Persian road networks, the veritable arteries of the Achaemenid Empire. Now, before you start picturing sleek highways with rest stops and diners, let's get one thing straight. These roads were no autobahns. They were more like the rugged trails of a backpacker who insists on taking the scenic route, even when it's riddled with potholes. The most illustrious of these was the Royal Road, a 700-kilometer stretch that connected Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa, one of the empire's bustling capitals. Built under the watchful eye of Darius I around 500 BCE, this road was a logistical masterpiece, or at least as much of a masterpiece as you can get with dirt and cobblestones. It was the beating heart of Persian communication, allowing messages to be relayed across the empire in a mere 7 days. For context, that's like sending a letter from New York to Los Angeles and getting a reply in the same week, without the help of FedEx or airmail. But before you get swept away by the romance of ancient mailmen zipping across the empire, let's debunk a few myths. The Royal Road wasn't exactly a smooth ride. It was more akin to a relay race with a series of relay stations, known as chaparkhane, where fresh horses and riders were stationed. This system undoubtedly impressed Herodotus, who famously quipped, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." Sounds familiar? Yup, the U.S. Postal Service owes a nod to this ancient network. However, let's not romanticize this into a tale of gallant riders galloping through picturesque landscapes. The reality was a bit grittier. Riding the Royal Road was a dusty, bone-rattling affair, especially for the common folk who didn't have the luxury of switching horses every 25 kilometers like the royal couriers. Imagine traversing rocky terrain with nothing more than a pair of sandals and a steely resolve. Not quite the stuff of epic road trips, but it got the job done. Economically, the road was a game-changer. It facilitated trade like nobody's business, connecting far-flung regions and allowing for the flow of goods, ideas, and perhaps a few rumors here and there. Persian roads weren't just conduits for commerce. They were the ancient world's version of the internet, albeit a slower, dustier one. Spices from India, gold from Egypt, and silk from China all made their way along these routes, enriching the empire and anyone savvy enough to ride the trading wave. The Royal Road also played a pivotal role in military logistics. Moving troops quickly and efficiently was crucial, and the road provided a strategic advantage that was as valuable as any fortress. In times of crisis, the Persian king could rally his forces faster than you could say Xerxes, making the road an unsung hero in the empire's defense strategy. However, let's not forget that roads run both ways. When Alexander the Great set his sights on Persia, he too used these very roads to march his troops into the heart of the empire, giving new meaning to the phrase, hoisted by one's own petard. So, what's the takeaway here? The Persian road networks were marvels of their time, but they were far from the romanticized superhighways of lore. These roads were gritty, practical, and downright necessary for the empire's survival. They weren't about luxury or comfort. They were about efficiency and control, the lifelines that kept the empire connected and cohesive. In the grand tapestry of history, Persian roads were the threads that held the empire together, showing us that sometimes the most unassuming paths lead to the greatest destinations. As we venture further into the annals of Persian history, remember that while the roads may have been rough, the journey they enabled was nothing short of extraordinary. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the rich, textured story of ancient Persia, one dusty mile at a time. So, as we meander through the dust and glory of ancient Persian roads, let's pivot to the towering legacy of Persian architecture and how it's left an indelible mark on today's world. Think of Persian architecture as the original Instagram influencer, stylish, trend-setting, and with a reach that spans continents and centuries. We're diving into a legacy that's still shaping skylines and cityscapes, even if the Persians themselves might be scratching their heads at some of the modern interpretations. First, let's clear up a common misconception that's been perpetuated by countless Hollywood flicks and Indiana Jones wannabes. The truth is, Persian architecture wasn't all about hidden treasures and elaborate booby traps. Forget the image of archaeologists narrowly escaping rolling boulders. Persian architects were more concerned with harmony and functionality than with creating a theme park for thrill seekers. The real treasure was in their groundbreaking designs, which emphasized symmetry, balance, and a deep connection to the natural environment. Take, for instance, the concept of the Persian garden. Known as paradise gardens, these were the blueprints for what we now call landscape architecture. The word paradise itself is derived from the Old Persian paradisa, meaning a walled enclosure. Imagine lush gardens meticulously arranged with water channels, reflecting pools, and an abundance of flora. an oasis of tranquility that stood in stark contrast to the harsh surrounding landscapes. These gardens weren't just pretty to look at. They were a reflection of the Persian worldview, where order and beauty were seen as divine imperatives. It's the kind of place where you could find enlightenment, or at least a moment of peace away from the chaos of empire building. Fast forward to today, and you can still see the echoes of these gardens in the design of public parks and urban green spaces worldwide. It's the same principle, creating a serene environment where people can disconnect from the hustle and bustle, a little slice of paradise amidst the concrete jungle. The influence of Persian gardens can be traced from the grounds of the Taj Mahal to the carefully manicured lawns of Versailles, proving that the Persian knack for blending nature and architecture was a trend that never went out of style. And speaking of trends, let's talk about the architectural innovation that was the Iwan. This vaulted space, open on one side and often embellished with intricate tilework, became a staple of Islamic architecture and a precursor to the grand arches we see in modern public buildings. Its origins can be traced back to Persian palaces and temples, where the Iwan served both as a practical shelter from the sun and a grandiose frame for the entrance to a building. The Iwan's design was so ahead of its time that it's still emulated in contemporary structures, from university campuses to government edifices. It's as if the Persians set the stage for the grand entrances we still marvel at today. Think of it as the architectural equivalent of rolling out the red carpet. But let's not gloss over the nitty-gritty. The grandeur of Persian architecture didn't come cheap, nor was it built overnight. These projects required extensive resources, skilled labor, and let's face it, a lot of royal patronage. The economic muscle behind such feats was as impressive as the structures themselves. The Persian Empire's wealth, drawn from its strategic positioning along major trade routes and its control over vast resources, was funneled into these architectural endeavors. It's a reminder that, even in ancient times, art and politics were inextricably linked, each feeding into the other in a cycle as old as civilization itself. Let's now debunk another myth that often romanticizes ancient Persian structures as mystical and otherworldly. While the artistic elements might have had an ethereal quality, the engineering was firmly grounded in practicality. The Persians were masters of using local materials, adapting their designs to suit the climate and topography. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about survival. The use of mud bricks, stone, and even the occasional timber had less to do with creating a fantasy land and more to do with making structures that could withstand the test of time and the elements. It's a lesson in sustainability that modern architects are only just beginning to relearn. Work with your environment, not against it. And what about those famous Persian columns, you ask? Ah, the columns, massive, majestic, and often adorned with the iconic double bull capitals. These weren't just for show. They were a symbol of power, meticulously crafted to support the grand roofs of palaces and halls. Today, echoes of these columns can be found in the neoclassical architecture of the Western world, in places like the US Capitol and the British Museum. It's as if these ancient pillars have become the backbone of not just buildings, but of the very concept of monumental architecture. The Greeks might have popularized the column, but it was the Persians who gave it its first starring role. So, what's the takeaway from this architectural journey through time? Persian architecture wasn't just about creating beautiful spaces. It was about crafting a narrative of power, unity, and cultural exchange. It was a way to bring people together, to create spaces where different cultures could meet and interact, a legacy that continues to shape our built environment. Whether it's in the gardens we stroll through, the palaces we admire, or the columns that support our institutions, the influence of Persian architecture is all around us, a testament to a civilization that understood the art of building not just for the present, but for posterity. In wrapping up this historical exploration, let's acknowledge the genius of an empire that knew how to make a statement through stone and mortar. The Achaemenid legacy is a reminder that architecture can be more than just buildings. It can be a reflection of ideals, a bridge between cultures, and a canvas for human creativity. So the next time you walk through a grand archway or relax in a city park, remember that the Persians were there first, laying the groundwork for the world we live in today. It's a legacy carved in stone, tiled in vibrant colors, and forever imprinted on the history of human achievement. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was like the ancient world's version of prime beachfront property, without the beach balls, but with a whole lot of cultural clout. Spanning from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, it was the kind of real estate that modern moguls would drool over. Forget the Hamptons. This empire was the actual hotspot, where trade routes crisscrossed like a well-worn carpet under the feet of vibrant cultures and bustling economies. Now, if you think the Neo-Babylonian Empire was all about dusty ruins and cuneiform tablets, think again. This was a place where trade wasn't just a sideline, it was the main event. We're talking about a region that eagerly opened its arms to merchants hailing from places as far-flung as Egypt, India, and even the mysterious lands of Anatolia. It was a melting pot long before that term got traded around like a vintage baseball card. Let's talk numbers. The empire stretched over 500 miles from the Persian Gulf up to the shores of the Mediterranean. That's about the distance from New York City to Charlotte, North Carolina, without the hassle of TSA checkpoints. This vast expanse included the lush, fertile lands of the Mesopotamian heartland, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers played their own game of hopscotch, creating a fertile crescent that was every farmer's dream. And boy, did they farm. Barley, dates, and wheat were the staples, fueling both the populace and the ever-important beer production. A crucial detail if you're planning on inviting the Mesopotamian equivalent of Jimmy Fallon to your next party. The empire's location wasn't just a happy accident. It was a strategic jackpot. Babylon, the capital, was the proverbial beating heart, a city with a name so legendary that it probably had its own theme music. It sat smack dab in the middle of the action, a bustling hub that facilitated trade like an ancient Wall Street, but with fewer suits and more sandals. This was where all roads, or more accurately all dusty tracks, led. The demographic makeup of the Neo-Babylonian Empire was as colorful as a Jackson Pollock painting. You had Chaldeans, who were the local celebrities, Akkadians, who brought their own flair, and a smattering of Arameans, Elamites, and other cultural groups that added their unique spices to the simmering societal stew. It was a society that thrived on its diversity, much like a modern university campus, minus the student loans and overpriced textbooks. Trade caravans were the Ubers of the ancient world, carrying goods like textiles, metals, and spices across vast distances. Babylonian merchants were as skilled as any Wall Street trader, just without the Bluetooth earpieces. They knew how to strike a deal, whether it was for a sack of grain or a shipment of lapis lazuli. The empire's central location meant that it was perfectly positioned for trade with both the East and the West, making it the Amazon prime of its time, delivering goods faster than you could say Nebuchadnezzar. Speaking of Nebuchadnezzar Roman II, the empire's most famous king was a man who knew the value of location, location, location. His reign from 605 to 562 BCE was marked by ambitious building projects, including the legendary Hanging Gardens. While historians debate whether these gardens actually existed or were just a bit of ancient Babylonian PR spin, the idea of an oasis in the desert captures the imagination. It's like wondering if Atlantis was real or just an elaborate way to sell seashells. The cultural tapestry of the Neo-Babylonian Empire was woven with threads of various beliefs, languages, and traditions. Aramaic was the lingua franca, the English of its day, allowing for smooth communication across diverse groups. It was like having a universal translator, minus the gizmos and gadgets. The Babylonians themselves spoke Akkadian, a language that had been around longer than your grandma's secret cookie recipe. Their scribes etched history into clay tablets, leaving behind a record of laws, transactions, and some truly epic tales. So, why did the Neo-Babylonian Empire matter? Well, besides being a precursor to globalization, it set the stage for future civilizations. Its influences stretched into Persian, Greek, and even Roman cultures. It showed the world that a diverse society could thrive, that trade could be a unifying force, and that sometimes the best real estate isn't just about location, but about the stories and connections that place holds. In the end, the Neo-Babylonian Empire was as much about people as it was about place. It was a crossroads of humanity, a testament to the power of geographical luck and human ingenuity. And as we wander through its dusty annals, we find that its legacy is not just in the ruins it left behind, but in the continued fascination it inspires. Whether you're a history buff or just someone who appreciates a good story, the Neo-Babylonian Empire offers a rich tapestry of cultural and economic intrigue that's as captivating as any modern-day saga. Now that we've set the stage with the empire's geographical jackpot and its bustling trade routes, it's time to delve into the nitty-gritty of its political structure. And let me tell you, the Neo-Babylonian political scene was a bit like a Game of Thrones episode, minus the dragons, and with more clay tablets. At the top of the hierarchy sat the king, a dual-role superstar who was both a divine figure and the CEO of Babylon Inc. Take Nebuchadnezzar Roman II, for example. This guy wasn't just the face on the empire's proverbial billboard. He was revered almost like a mini-deity. His subjects believed he had a direct line to the gods, which is a pretty nifty PR move when you're trying to keep a sprawling empire in check. But don't be fooled by the halo. Being king wasn't all about lounging in opulent palaces and commissioning hanging gardens. In reality, Nebuchadnezzar had to juggle between divine duties and the very earthly task of managing a complex bureaucracy. Think of him as a mix between a religious icon and a modern-day politician, except with more eyeliner and fewer campaign ads. Below the king, the power structure was a multi-layered cake, with the priesthood and temples being the rich, dense filling. These weren't just places for spiritual contemplation. They were economic powerhouses that could give any Wall Street firm a run for its money. Temples owned vast tracts of land, controlled agricultural output, and were the central banks of their time. They collected taxes, stored grain, and even issued loans. Imagine a church that doubles as a bank, farm, and government office. Talk about diversification. The priests were the ancient world's power brokers, wielding influence like seasoned lobbyists. They had the king's ear and often advised on matters of state, which sometimes led to palace intrigue worthy of a soap opera. Picture this, a high priest whispering strategies to the king while secretly plotting his own rise to power. The priesthood was essentially the ancient version of corporate lobbying, complete with under-the-table deals and a healthy dose of backstabbing. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there, even when you're wearing a ceremonial robe. In terms of economic clout, the temples were akin to modern financial institutions. They owned significant landholdings, which were worked by tenant farmers who paid rent in the form of produce or labor. This system allowed the temples to amass wealth and resources, making them key players in the empire's economic landscape. It's like if your local bank also managed your farm and dictated the interest rates on your barley harvest. Let's not forget the scribes, the unsung heroes who kept this bureaucratic machine running smoothly. These were the data analysts of their day, recording everything from tax records to legal contracts on clay tablets. Skilled in the ancient art of cuneiform, they were the ones who ensured that the empire's administrative wheels kept turning. Without them, the king's decrees would be as effective as a tweet without Wi-Fi. While the king and his court were busy with governance, the empire's regional governors, known as satraps, managed distant provinces. These officials were like middle management in a massive corporate structure, responsible for implementing the king's policies and keeping local populations in line. Satraps collected taxes, maintained order, and reported back to the king's court. They were the boots on the ground, ensuring that the empire's far-flung territories didn't devolve into chaos. But here's the kicker. The satraps were often local chieftains or nobles who had pledged loyalty to the king. This meant they had a vested interest in maintaining their own power bases. So, while they were supposed to be the king's loyal servants, they sometimes had their own agendas, leading to a delicate balancing act between loyalty and ambition. It's a classic tale of power dynamics, where the line between ally and rival can be as thin as a strand of spun gold. Amidst this intricate web of power, the common folk, farmers, artisans, and laborers, went about their daily lives, often unaware of the political machinations above them. They were the backbone of the empire, producing the food, goods, and services that fueled Babylon's economy. While the elites squabbled over power, these everyday citizens kept the wheels of society turning. It's a timeless theme. The ordinary people who quietly sustain a civilization, while the elites play their high-stakes games. In this grand tapestry, the Neo-Babylonian Empire was more than just its temples, kings, and priests. It was a living, breathing entity, shaped as much by the people in its streets as by the rulers in its palaces. And while the priests jark-eyed for influence, and the king balanced divine duties with bureaucratic responsibilities, the empire thrived, leaving behind a legacy that continues to captivate us today. As we dig deeper into this ancient world, we'll uncover more stories of power, intrigue, and the timeless dance between ambition and duty. But for now, let's leave the courtly whispers and temple treasuries behind as we prepare to explore the empire's next chapter. Now, leaving behind the whispers of the court and the clink of temple coins, let's dive into the earthy aroma of the Neo-Babylonian breadbasket, agriculture. This wasn't just any old field. It was the empire's economic canvas, painted with the greens and golds of barley, wheat, and dates. Imagine the Tigris and Euphrates rivers not as mere water channels, but as the ancient world's plumbing system, complete with occasional leaks and the constant need for maintenance. These rivers weren't just babbling brooks. They were the arteries that kept Babylon's agricultural heart beating. Farmers of the era were like the original startup founders, working tirelessly to cultivate land that was as fertile as a gossip column. Armed with tools that would make a modern farmer cringe, think wooden plows and sickles, they managed to coax out bumper crops that fed the empire's insatiable appetite. Barley was the reigning champion, not just for bread, but also as the main ingredient in the empire's beloved beer. Yes, you heard it right. Beer was the drink of choice, and not just for weekend barbecues. It was the ancient equivalent of a morning cappuccino, essential for starting the day. These agricultural endeavors weren't just about feeding mouths, but also about fueling trade. The surplus grain and produce were the empire's ticket to the world market, traded for exotic goods that would make any Babylonian's eyes sparkle with delight. This wasn't a simple barter system. It was a complex economic ballet, with merchants and traders as the nimble dancers. They didn't have spreadsheets or stock tickers, but they did have clay tablets, thousands of them, etched with transactions so detailed they'd make a CPA swoon. Speaking of those clay tablets, let's take a moment to appreciate the Neo-Babylonians' penchant for meticulous record-keeping. These ancient accountants inscribed the nitty-gritty of trade deals, loans, and legal agreements onto tablets that have, quite literally, stood the test of time. It's like finding your great-great-grandparents' tax returns in pristine condition, complete with deductions for sheep and grain. These tablets reveal a society that valued precision, a far cry from the romantic image of dusty scrolls and vague accounts. Now, unto the merchants, those daring souls who braved the desert sands and mountain passes in search of the next big thing. Picture them as the hipsters of their time, always on the hunt for goods that would set the Babylonian markets ablaze. Textiles were a hot commodity, with Babylonian wool prized across the known world. They didn't have fashion weeks or runway shows, but they did have a keen eye for quality and style. And then there were the spices. Oh, the spices. Imagine the thrill of introducing a new flavor to the Babylonian palate, the ancient equivalent of a food truck debuting a novel dish. These merchants were more than peddlers. They were the lifeblood of Babylon's economy, connecting the empire to lands as far-flung as Egypt, India, and Anatolia. Their caravans were like mini-corporations on wheels, complete with a diverse crew that might include scribes, guards, and the occasional camel whisperer. Their journeys weren't just about profit. They were missions of cultural exchange, bringing back tales of distant lands and strange customs that fueled Babylon's cosmopolitan vibe. But let's not get too carried away by the romance of the merchant's life. The reality was often harsh, with threats lurking around every sand dune. Bandits, sandstorms, and the ever-present risk of a bad deal meant that only the shrewdest survived. It was a high-stakes game, one where a single misstep could lead to financial ruin or worse, a fate as uncertain as the shifting desert sands. In this bustling marketplace of goods and ideas, trade was the empire's connective tissue, holding together a diverse population with a common interest in prosperity. It wasn't just about exchanging goods. It was about building relationships and networks that span the known world. It's like LinkedIn, but with more camels and fewer online endorsements. The Neo-Babylonian economy was a complex beast, driven by agriculture and trade, but also by the socio-political machinery that supported it. The king and his court, with their grand ambitions and divine mandates, set the tone, but it was the ordinary farmers, merchants, and scribes who kept the wheels turning. Their stories, etched into clay and whispered in market stalls, are a testament to the empire's enduring legacy, a legacy of innovation, resilience, and the timeless quest for the next big thing. As we journey through this ancient landscape, we see that the Neo-Babylonian Empire was more than just a footnote in history. It was a vibrant, dynamic society that thrived on its diversity and ingenuity, leaving behind tales as rich and varied as the lands it once ruled. But don't pack up your camels just yet. There's still more ground to cover, more secrets to uncover in the dusty pages of history. So, stay tuned as we continue our exploration, where every clay tablet holds a new adventure and every market stall whispers a forgotten story. As we journey deeper into the Neo-Babylonian world, it's time to leave the bustling marketplace behind and take a closer look at the people who called this empire home. Picture yourself walking through the dusty streets of Babylon, past vendors hawking their wares and children playing games that would baffle even the most dedicated Sudoku enthusiast. Here, in the heart of the empire, the real drama of daily life unfolds, not in grand palaces, but in humble homes and crowded alleys. The social structure of Neo-Babylonia was as layered as a mille-feuille pastry, with each tier holding its own flavor of life. At the top of the heap were the free citizens, or Awilu as they were known. These were the folks who could afford to sleep a little easier, knowing they had rights and status to back them up. Being a free citizen meant you could own property, vote in local assemblies, and most importantly, not worry about being sold to the highest bidder. It was the ancient world's version of winning the social lottery, complete with a lifetime supply of smug satisfaction. But let's cut through the romanticism of free citizenship. Just because you had the title didn't mean you were living the ancient equivalent of a Kardashian lifestyle. Free citizens ranged from wealthy landowners to modest artisans, and the gap between them could be as wide as the Euphrates itself. Sure, you might own a bit of land or a workshop, but unless you were rolling in barley profits, life was still a daily hustle. It's a bit like being a middle-class urbanite today, enough to get by, but not quite enough to retire on a private island. Below the free citizens were the mushkenu, the commoners. Think of them as the middle management of Mesopotamian society, important enough to keep the wheels turning, but without the perks of a corner office. These folks had fewer rights than their Awilu counterparts, but still maintained a degree of autonomy. They worked as farmers, craftsmen, and merchants, contributing to the economic fabric of the empire. It's a reminder that while the elites might make the headlines, it's the everyday workers who keep the story moving. Then we hit the bottom rung, the slaves, or wardu. While the word might conjure images of chains and whips, the reality was a bit more nuanced, though no less harsh. Slavery in the Neo-Babylonian Empire wasn't based on race, but on circumstance. You could become a slave through war, debt, or as punishment for crime. And unlike today's job market, there was little hope for upward mobility. Once you were in, chances are you were in for life. However, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Some slaves managed to buy their freedom, often through saving up their meager earnings or through the goodwill of a benevolent master. It's proof that even in the grimmest situations, human resilience finds a way. Yet, for most, life as a slave was a daily grind with little respite, a stark reminder of the empire's rigid hierarchy. Now, if you think social mobility was a thing, think again. The Neo-Babylonian Empire wasn't exactly the land of opportunity. The class you were born into was likely the one you'd stay in until the end, unless you had the cunning of a king or the luck of a lottery winner. Even family ties and marriage were more about maintaining status than about love stories fit for a rom-com. Marriages were often arranged, with dowries and strategic alliances taking precedence over romance. It was less Romeo and Juliet and more Wall Street merger, complete with negotiations and contract clauses. And speaking of contracts, the Neo-Babylonians were fanatics for law and order. Justice was swift and often brutal. The famous Code of Hammurabi, though predating our period, set a precedent that echoed through the empire's legal system. Laws covered everything from property disputes to personal injury, with punishments that could make a modern courtroom drama look like a children's play. If you wronged someone, you could expect to pay dearly, sometimes with your life. It's a stark testament to the empire's commitment to order, even if it meant a few heads had to roll. Take a moment to consider what justice meant in this ancient world. The law was less about rehabilitation and more about deterrence. Eye for an eye wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a legal reality. Steal a loaf of bread, and you might find yourself minus a hand. It's the kind of justice that makes you appreciate the comparative leniency of modern-day parking tickets. But here's the kicker. Despite the harshness of these laws, they were a vital part of maintaining social order in a sprawling empire. They reflected an understanding that without rules, chaos would reign, a truth as relevant today as it was in 600 BCE. So, while justice might have been brutal, it was also a necessary evil in keeping the Babylonian streets from descending into anarchy. In this world of rigid social hierarchies and swift justice, life could be tough, but it was also vibrant and full of human stories. The Neo-Babylonians navigated their world with a mix of ambition, tradition, and resilience, crafting lives that were as complex and layered as the empire itself. As we continue our exploration, remember that behind every clay tablet and every ancient artifact lies the heartbeat of a civilization, a reminder that even in the distant past, the human experience was as rich and varied as it is today. But don't get too comfortable just yet. We've only scratched the surface of what life was like in this ancient powerhouse. There's still plenty more to uncover, from the empire's cultural quirks to the lesser-known tales of intrigue and innovation. So, keep those sandals strapped and your curiosity piqued as we wander further down this historical path, where every twist and turn promises new insights and stories waiting to be told. While we've waded through the gritty layers of Neo-Babylonian society, it's time to toss off the sandals and dive into the empire's intellectual pool, where the ancients weren't just scribbling on clay tablets for kicks. They were laying the groundwork for some of the very things we take for granted today, like knowing whether to pack an umbrella based on an astronomical almanac, or calculating your tip using the magic of mathematics. Let's kick things off with numbers because, frankly, who doesn't love a good math story? The Babylonians weren't just doodling with numbers. They were the original number crunchers, the OG mathletes of the ancient world. We're talking a sexagesimal, base 60 number system, which might sound like a nightmare from your high school math class, but was actually pure genius. This base 60 system is why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle, a legacy as enduring as your old school report card. And here's a juicy tidbit. These ancient mathematicians were solving quadratic equations and calculating square roots long before Pythagoras was a twinkle in his daddy's eye. They even used tablets like the Plimpton 322, which dates back to around 1800 BCE and shows an understanding of Pythagorean triples. That's right, they were doing the heavy lifting on triangles before the Greeks made it cool. So next time you marvel at your GPS, give a silent nod to those scribes hunched over their tablets, working out calculations that would eventually guide spacecraft to the stars. Speaking of stars, the Babylonians weren't just grounded in numbers. They had their eyes on the skies, too. Their keen observations laid the foundation for astronomy with detailed star catalogues and lunar calendars that would make any modern astronomer proud. They recorded celestial events with a precision that would give NASA a run for its money, predicting eclipses and tracking planetary movements with nothing more than keen eyesight and a whole lot of patience. But let's not get too starry-eyed. While the Babylonians were busy charting the stars, they were also navigating the rocky terrain of astrology, a field that, let's be honest, doesn't exactly have the same scientific rigor. Sure, they might have been able to predict a solar eclipse, but they also believed these celestial events foretold the fate of kings and empires. It's a bit like your horoscope predicting you'll meet someone tall, dark, and handsome at the coffee shop. Entertaining, yes, but maybe not something to bet your life savings on. While the heavens were a source of both fascination and superstition, the Babylonians were equally invested in the arts of the earth, particularly literature. You've probably heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the ancient world's answer to the blockbuster novel. This epic tale, etched into 12 clay tablets, recounts the adventures of the eponymous hero as he grapples with gods, beasts, and the existential dread of mortality. It's the kind of story that keeps you up at night, pondering life's big questions, like why are we here? And did I leave the oven on? Literature was more than just epic tales, though. Babylonian scribes also churned out hymns, prayers, and wisdom literature that captured the zeitgeist of their era. These texts offer a glimpse into the everyday worries and aspirations of a society that, despite its grandeur, faced many of the same struggles we do today. Love, loss, and the relentless pursuit of a good barley brew. But let's pause for a reality check. While we romanticize Babylon as an ancient beacon of enlightenment, the truth is that these intellectual pursuits were often a luxury afforded only to the elite. The vast majority of Babylonians were more concerned with tilling the soil or trading goods than contemplating the cosmos. It's a sobering reminder that even the brightest cultural achievements often exist alongside stark societal divides. So, what does all this mean for us today? In a world that often feels like it's spinning out of control, the Neo-Babylonian Empire offers a timely lesson in balance. They knew the importance of looking both inward and outward, of balancing the practical with the philosophical. They remind us that while it's crucial to keep our feet on the ground, it's equally important to let our minds wander among the stars. As we wrap up our whirlwind tour of this ancient powerhouse, let's acknowledge what the Neo-Babylonians truly left us. A legacy of curiosity and resilience. They were pioneers in a world that was as unpredictable as their riverbanks, navigating challenges with a mix of innovation, tradition, and a touch of cosmic wonder. So, when you next glance at your watch or check the weather, spare a thought for those ancient scribes and stargazers. Their stories, etched in clay and sung by poets, remind us that even in the face of uncertainty, the human spirit is an indomitable force. It reaches across millennia, whispering tales of ambition, discovery, and the age-old quest to make sense of the universe. And as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll dream not just of ancient empires, but of the enduring truths they reveal, truths that continue to shape our modern world in ways both big and small. Sparta, the name alone conjures images of muscle-bound warriors and stoic discipline, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before they were the ultimate poster kids for military prowess, they were just a bunch of communities trying to figure out how to run a society without imploding. And imploding, by the way, was a very real concern in the chaotic Greek world of the first millennium BCE. Enter the dual kingship system, a governmental oddity that makes modern coalition politics look like a cakewalk. Yes, that's right. 2 kings, not 1. Because apparently when it comes to ruling, 2 heads were thought to be better than 1, even if they occasionally butted like rams. This double-barreled monarchy wasn't just some ancient experiment in power-sharing. Oh no, it was a calculated strategy to keep Sparta from splintering into civil chaos. Picture 2 rival families, the Agids and the Eurypontids, each claiming divine ancestry. Because what's a good family feud without the guards getting involved? These 2 royal lines were like the Montagues and Capulets, but with more spears and fewer balcony scenes. Each king had specific duties. One could be off waging war, while the other stayed home to handle domestic affairs. It was a division of labor that would make any modern HR manager proud, if not a bit envious. The dual kingship was supported by the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, because every great society needs a council of wise, old men to balance out the impetuousness of youth. These were the original silver foxes of Sparta, 28 elders over the age of 60, alongside the 2 kings, making a total of 30 council members. It's like they invented the idea of a senate, only this one came with a strict age requirement and a heavy dose of gravitas. The Gerousia proposed laws and served as a high court, having the final say on matters of life and death. Talk about job security. Now, these wise elders weren't just sitting around sipping ambrosia. They were the guardians of the Eunomia, a concept translated as good order. This wasn't just any order. It was the Spartan brand of order, which involved rigorous discipline, communal living, and enough regulations to make your average homeowners association blush. The Spartans believed that Eunomia was the secret sauce that made their society tick like a well-oiled phalanx. It was about creating harmony through discipline, an approach that was as much about military efficiency as it was about social cohesion. But here's the kicker. Eunomia wasn't just a Spartan thing. It was a broader Greek ideal, but Sparta took it to the nth degree, making it their raison d'etre. While other Greek city-states were busy inventing democracy or perfecting the art of pottery, Sparta was laser-focused on maintaining its good order through a strict social hierarchy. Because who needs democracy when you can have a perfectly synchronized military society? Now, let's not pretend this was all sunshine and harp lights. The dual kingship and the Gerousia didn't mean that Sparta was a utopian paradise. Far from it. In reality, this system was born out of a need to constantly adapt to external threats and internal unrest. After all, when you're surrounded by hostile neighbors and reliant on a subjugated population of Helots to do your dirty work, you need more than just brute strength. You need a system that keeps everyone in line. And yet, for all its rigidity, the Spartan system was remarkably resilient, lasting for several centuries. It was a society that managed to resist the lure of wealth and luxury, not because they were above it, but because they realized it was a surefire way to invite division and downfall. Instead, they embraced a lifestyle that would make minimalists look like hoarders, all in the name of preserving their unique way of life. So, the next time you hear someone wax poetic about the Spartan way, remember it's a tale of two kings, a council of elders, and a singular obsession with order. It's a story of how one society chose the path of discipline over decadence, creating a legacy that still fascinates us today. But let's not kid ourselves. Sparta's system was as much about necessity as it was about nobility. And as we delve deeper into this ancient world, we'll see that the dual kingship was just the beginning of Sparta's peculiar, yet enduring, social experiment. Now, as we dive deeper into the Spartan social hierarchy, let's start with the A-listers of ancient Sparta, the Spartiates. These guys were the creme de la creme, the full citizens who had it all: land, political clout, and the kind of social status that would make even the most fervent Instagram influencer green with envy. Of course, their prestige didn't come from posting selfies, but from a lifetime of rigorous training in the agoge, Sparta's brutal education system that churned out soldiers like an assembly line. Every Spartiate male was a soldier first, a farmer second, and a politician only if he had time left over. The Spartiates were a relatively small group, numbering around 8,000 at their peak in the 5th century BCE. These were the folks who could trace their lineage back to the original Dorian invaders, or at least they liked to think so. This sense of ancestral pride was crucial because it justified their position at the top of the social ladder, like a lineage-based VIP passed to the after-party of history. Their lifestyle was all about austerity and discipline, wrapped in a cloak of martial prowess. Wealth, in the form of luxuries, was frowned upon, but land ownership was a different story. Each Spartiate was allotted a plot of land worked by Helots, the local labor force, ensuring that the Spartiates could focus on what really mattered, being the best warriors in Greece. But just beneath the Spartiates in this rigid social pyramid were the Perioikoi, the free non-citizens. While they might not have been on the guest list for the most exclusive Spartan gatherings, they played a vital role in keeping the Spartan machine running smoothly. The Perioikoi lived in surrounding towns and villages, forming the economic backbone of Sparta. They were the artisans, tradespeople, and merchants, handling the dirty business of trade and manufacturing, while the Spartiates flexed their muscles on the battlefield. In essence, they were the indispensable support staff of Sparta, the unsung heroes who made sure the phalanx had its shields, the soldiers had their sandals, and the city had its spoils of war. The Perioikoi were free, but lacked the political rights of the Spartiates. They couldn't vote or hold office, but they did enjoy some level of autonomy. They had their own communities and governance, provided their own soldiers to the Spartan army, and paid taxes to the Spartan state. In return, they were left alone to pursue their economic activities, a trade-off that kept the Spartan economy humming along. It was a symbiotic relationship that worked well enough to keep the Spartan military engine fueled without the Perioikoi ever needing to know how to wield a spear. Now, let's talk about the Helots, the lowest rung of the Spartan social ladder. If the Spartiates were the rock stars and the Perioikoi were the roadies, then the Helots were the stager hands. Except these stager hands were indentured for life and had zero chance of a career change. The Helots were essentially serfs, tied to the land they worked for the Spartiate landowners. Unlike slaves in other ancient societies, they weren't bought and sold on the market, but their lives were no less harsh. They were originally the native inhabitants of Laconia and Messenia, conquered and subjugated by the Spartans, and they outnumbered the Spartiates by a staggering 7-1. That's right, for every Spartiate, there were 7 Helots, which made controlling them a full-time job. The Spartans were so paranoid about a Helot uprising that they instituted the crypteia, a sort of secret police force composed of young Spartiates. These young men roamed the countryside, tasked with keeping the Helot population in check through intimidation and violence. It was a brutal system that made sure the Helots stayed in line, but it also meant that Sparta had to constantly be on guard against potential revolts. Here's the kicker. The Helots were essential to the Spartan way of life. Without their labor, the Spartiates couldn't dedicate themselves entirely to military training. The Helots were the backbone of the Spartan economy, working the fields and providing the food that sustained the Spartan war machine. Thus, the very people the Spartans oppressed were the same ones who underpinned their entire society. This rigid class system was both Sparta's strength and its Achilles' heel. On one hand, it allowed the Spartans to focus exclusively on military pursuits, creating the most formidable fighting force in ancient Greece. But on the other hand, it left them vulnerable to internal instability. Constant fear of Helot revolts meant that Sparta had to maintain a delicate balance. Too much leniency, and the Helots might rise up. Too much oppression, and the same result could occur. This constant tension was like living next to a volcano, one that hadn't erupted yet, but could at any moment. And let's not pretend that the Spartan way of life was all about noble warriors and heroic deeds. The harsh reality was that this society was built on the backs of the oppressed, with systemic inequalities that modern readers might find appalling. Yet, the romanticized image of the Spartan warrior endures, a testament to the allure of discipline and strength wrapped in the mythology of an ancient superpower. But the real story, as always, is more complex, filled with the contradictions and challenges of a society striving for survival in a brutal world. As we explore further, we'll see how this rigid hierarchy played out in daily life, how the Spartans maintained their iron grip on power, and how their social experiment ultimately shaped their destiny. The Spartans may have been masters of warfare, but their true battle was maintaining the precarious balance of their own society. And that, dear listeners, is a story for another day. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the enigma of ancient Sparta, a society that dared to defy the norms of its time, with all the triumphs and tragedies that entailed. Sparta's social experiment wasn't just about maintaining a well-oiled military machine. It was about starting that engine early, with the kind of childhood experience that would make modern parenting experts clutch their pearls. Enter the agoge, Sparta's infamous education system that might as well have been the ancient world's version of Survivor. Forget about arts and crafts time. This was more like Lord of the Flies, but with even fewer rules and more spears. The agoge was compulsory for all male Spartiates starting at the tender age of 7. While most kids today are learning to tie their shoelaces, young Spartans were learning how to tie intricate knots in their psyches, steeling themselves for a lifetime of warriorhood. Picture this: a group of boys, plucked from their homes and thrown into a world where survival skills were the curriculum, and the playground was a proving ground for future phalanx fighters. These boys were organized into packs, or herds, overseen by older youths known as irons. The irons were essentially senior students, often in their late teens, who had the delightful job of making sure the young ones didn't slack off. Imagine your older sibling being given free rein to boss you around, with the full backing of the state. It's no wonder the agoge produced tough cookies. The social dynamics alone could turn anyone into a hardened Spartan. Now, let's talk about the curriculum. While other Greek city-states were busy teaching philosophy, rhetoric, and maybe a bit of geometry, Sparta's educational focus was razor-sharp. It revolved around physical endurance, stealth, and the art of combat. Reading and riding, not so much. The Spartans figured that if you could wield a sword like Achilles, you didn't need to read the fine print on your shield warranty. The boys were subjected to rigorous physical training designed to enhance their endurance and strength. Daily exercises included running, jumping, wrestling, and javelin throwing, essentially an all-day gym class with none of the dodgeball breaks. But it wasn't just about building muscles, it was about building resilience. The agoge was a relentless test of willpower, a gauntlet that separated the merely sturdy from the truly unbreakable. And then there was the infamous cryptare. Once you reached your late teens, you might be selected for this secretive institution, a kind of final exam for the Spartan elite. Participants were sent into the countryside with nothing but a knife, tasked with surviving off the land, and more grimly, keeping the Helot population in check. It wasn't just a test of survival skills. It was a chilling initiation into the harsh realities of Spartan rule. So why did the Spartans think this brutal education system was the bee's knees? They believed it was the ultimate preparation for the harsh world of adulthood. By the time a Spartan male graduated from the agoge at age 20, he was expected to be the epitome of discipline and martial prowess, ready to join the Sisisha, the communal mess halls where Spartan soldiers continued their training over shared meals, because nothing says camaraderie like bonding over a bowl of black broth, a delightful concoction of pig's blood, vinegar, and salt that was as much a test of taste buds as it was a meal. But before you start thinking that Spartans were just a bunch of battle-hardened brutes, let's debunk the myth of the mindless warrior. The agoge wasn't just about physical might. It was also about instilling a deep sense of duty, loyalty, and cunning. Intelligence was valued, but it had to be the right kind, practical, strategic, and always in service of the state. A Spartan might not quote Socrates, but he could certainly outmaneuver you on the battlefield. Now, here's the kicker. For all its rigor, the agoge wasn't universally applied. Only those of the elite Spartiates class underwent this boot camp from hell. It was both a privilege and a burden, a rite of passage that cemented one's status in Spartan society. For the Perioikoi and Helots, the agoge was a distant spectacle, a reminder of the iron grip the Spartiates held over their world. They were the audience to this grand theatre of education, watching from the sidelines as the future warriors of Sparta were forged. In many ways, the agoge was the embodiment of Spartan ethos, a relentless pursuit of excellence through hardship. It was a system that prioritized collective strength over individual comfort, preparing its graduates for a life where personal sacrifice was the highest virtue. But let's not romanticize it too much. The agoge was as much a tool of social control as it was a training ground for warriors. It was a way to mold citizens who would think, act, and fight as one, ensuring the stability of the Spartan state. Yet, for all its severity, the agoge produced results. Spartan warriors were renowned throughout Greece, not just for their prowess, but for their unwavering discipline and unity. These were men who could stand firm in the face of overwhelming odds, all because they'd been trained to value the collective over the individual from the moment they could walk. The agoge was an engine of social cohesion, forging a bond that was stronger than any helmet or shield. So, as we continue to peel back the layers of Spartan society, let's remember that its legendary warriors weren't born. They were made, through a process that was as much about shaping the mind as it was about honing the body. And in the end, the agoge was more than just an education system. It was Sparta's ultimate act of self-preservation, a way to ensure that its legacy would stand the test of time, even if the methods would make modern educators break out in a cold sweat. As we move forward in our exploration of Sparta, keep in mind that the agoge was just one piece of the puzzle. The Spartan way of life was a complex orchestration of discipline, duty, and yes, a bit of dread. But don't worry, there's plenty more to uncover in this saga of ancient grit and grandeur. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the intricacies of Spartan society, because if there's one thing the Spartans knew, it's that the real battle was just beginning. As we continue our journey through the annals of Spartan society, let's pivot to a topic that's as intriguing as it is unexpected: the role of Spartan women. If you thought the men of Sparta were the only ones with some serious societal clout, think again. Spartan women had a status that was nothing short of revolutionary for the ancient world. In a plot twist that would leave even the most seasoned soap opera writers gasping, these women had more rights than their Athenian counterparts, and they didn't even have to fight for it. Literally, let's set the scene. While Athenian women were largely relegated to the domestic sphere, Spartan women were busy shaking up the social norms. They were educated, economically active, and wielded a surprising amount of influence both in and out of the household. Starting with education, Spartan girls underwent physical training almost as rigorous as the boys. Yes, you heard that right. While little Sally from Athens was learning the fine art of weaving, her Spartan counterpart was out running, wrestling, and throwing javelins. The Spartans believed that strong women would produce strong warriors, and they weren't about to leave that to chance. It was a societal investment, if you will, a sort of ancient eugenics program with a fitness twist. But hold onto your helmets, because it gets even more fascinating. Spartan women could own and inherit property, a right that was practically unheard of in most of the ancient world. In fact, by the late classical period, it's estimated that Spartan women owned about 40% of the land in Sparta. Yes, you read that correctly. While their Athenian sisters were essentially property themselves, Spartan women were out there making real estate deals that would make a modern realtor proud. This economic clout gave them a voice in society that was rare for women at the time. They could influence family decisions, and their opinions were respected in a way that was almost unheard of in other Greek city-states. Marriage customs in Sparta were another arena where women played an unexpected role. Forget about the romanticized wedding ceremonies of today. Spartan marriages were more like strategic alliances. The process was downright bizarre by today's standards. It often involved a mock abduction, where the bride's head was shaved, and she was dressed in men's clothing before being spirited away by her future husband. Why the theatricality, you ask? Well, it was part of a ritual designed to ease young men into the idea of marriage, preserving their warrior lifestyle even as they settled into domesticity. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a bachelor party prank, but with lifelong consequences. Once married, Spartan women didn't merely fade into the background. They were expected to manage the household, which included overseeing the helots and ensuring the economic stability of their property. And let's not forget, these ladies ran the show while the men were off playing soldier. Spartan women could even remarry if their husbands were away for too long, a practical solution to maintaining the population. It's like they had a plan B, C, and D before contingency planning was even a thing. Now, let's address the question that's probably bubbling up in your mind. Was this as progressive as it sounds? On the surface, it certainly seems that way. But let's not sugarcoat it. Spartan society was still very much patriarchal. The rights and privileges that women enjoyed were primarily designed to serve the state's interests. Women were valued for their role in producing and rearing strong warriors, and their economic influence was tolerated because it supported the Spartan war machine. In essence, their freedoms were a means to an end, not an end in themselves. Moreover, the freedoms of Spartan women came with their own set of societal pressures. They were expected to bear and raise strong children, a duty that was as much about state service as personal fulfillment. And while they had more rights than Athenian women, they were still excluded from voting and political decision-making. Their influence was significant but indirect, wielded through their control of property and their roles as mothers of warriors. This strange cocktail of empowerment and utilitarianism paints a complex picture. Spartan women were both liberated and constrained, influential yet marginalized. Their status was a byproduct of a society geared towards military efficiency, where every aspect of life was subordinated to the needs of the state. It's a reminder that progress can come with strings attached, and that societal roles often serve a broader agenda that may not align with modern concepts of individual rights. And yet, the legacy of Spartan women endures as a testament to their unique place in history. They were outliers in a world that largely viewed women as secondary citizens, and their story challenges our assumptions about gender roles in ancient societies. As we delve further into Spartan life, let's keep in mind that these women were an integral part of the societal fabric, contributing in ways that defied the norms of their time. So, as we wrap up this chapter of Spartan society, remember that the story of Sparta is not just one of warriors and battles. It's also a tale of women who navigated a patriarchal world with a level of autonomy that was both groundbreaking and pragmatic. And with that, we leave you with a cliffhanger worthy of the finest historical drama. Who knew ancient history could be this riveting? Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the Spartan saga, because as the Spartans knew all too well, the past has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. And as the curtain falls on the tale of Spartan women, it's time to address the final act of this ancient drama, how Sparta's iron-willed focus on war and control ultimately led to its downfall. Picture a society so dedicated to martial excellence that it became its own Achilles' heel. You see, the very elements that made Sparta the warrior's paradise also sowed the seeds for its decline. Let's take a closer look at how this paradox unfolded. Sparta was the heavyweight champion of ancient Greece, its military might unrivaled, and its warriors feared from one end of the Peloponnese to the other. The Spartans perfected the phalanx formation, a human tank made of shields and spears, and they were the undisputed kings of battlefield choreography. But here's the kicker. Their focus on perpetual readiness for war left little room for flexibility or innovation. While other Greek city-states like Athens were busy inventing democracy, philosophy, and theater, Sparta was perfecting the art of standing perfectly still and stabbing things. But let's talk numbers. At its peak during the 5th century BCE, Sparta could field an army of about 8,000 Spartiates. Sounds impressive, right? Well, not when you consider that their social structure was a Jenga tower teetering on a base of oppressed Helots, who outnumbered them by upwards of 7 to 1. That's about 56,000 Helots, folks who weren't exactly thrilled about being the underclass. The Spartans lived in constant fear of a Helot uprising, which meant they had to keep a significant portion of their forces at home for internal security. It's tough to conquer the world when you're busy policing your backyard. Economically, Sparta was a bit like a one-hit wonder band. It nailed the military gig, but completely bombed in other arenas. The Spartan economy was agrarian, relying heavily on the labor of Helots to produce food. They weren't exactly known for their bustling marketplaces or thriving trade routes. In fact, they shunned currency and luxury, preferring iron spits to gold coins. While this helped maintain their austere lifestyle, it also meant that they had little economic flexibility. When times changed, and they always, Sparta was left with a pile of iron spits, and not much else. Politically, Sparta was as rigid as their shields, which is not a compliment in this context. Their dual kingship system, while initially effective in balancing power and preventing any single ruler from running amok, eventually became an Achilles heel. As other Greek states evolved their political systems, Sparta stayed stuck in its traditional ways, like a stubborn old mule refusing to learn new tricks. This inflexibility would prove costly when it came to adapting to new challenges. The turning point came with the Peloponnesian War, 431-404 BCE, where Sparta and its allies faced off against Athens and the Delian League. Sparta won the war, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The conflict drained resources, weakened military strength, and exposed the vulnerabilities in their rigid system. Victory brought temporary glory, but also new challenges that Sparta was ill-equipped to handle, like managing an empire when you're used to running a city-state. And then there's the mythic allure of the Spartan warrior, an image that still captivates modern imaginations. The legends of Thermopylae and Leonidas's last stand against the Persians at the famous battle of 480 BCE are the stuff of epic tales. But let's not forget the gritty reality behind them. While 300 Spartans did indeed make a heroic stand, they were supported by thousands of other Greek allies, a detail often glossed over in the romantic retellings. The Spartan myth endures not because of historical accuracy, but because it speaks to the human fascination with heroism and sacrifice. As the centuries rolled on, Sparta's inability to adapt led to a slow decline. By the time of the Roman conquest, in the 2nd century BCE, Sparta was but a shadow of its former self, more museum exhibit than military powerhouse. The rigid social structure that once held them together ultimately restricted their ability to evolve, and they became a cautionary tale about the dangers of stagnation. So why do we still talk about Sparta? Why does the Spartan legacy still resonate? It's a classic case of the allure of the underdog, the romance of defiance against overwhelming odds, and the seductive power of discipline and unity. Sparta's contradictions, its strength and its fragility, offer a mirror to our own societal dilemmas, challenging us to think about balance, adaptability, and the true costs of maintaining power. In the end, Sparta's story is a reminder that even the mightiest can fall if they fail to adapt. It's a narrative of triumph and tragedy, of a society that dared to be different but paid the price for its singular focus. Spartan myth endures because it captures the human spirit's complexity, the eternal struggle between order and chaos, tradition and innovation. So, as you drift off into the arms of Morpheus, ponder the lessons of Sparta. That strength without flexibility is brittle, that discipline without adaptability is a trap, and that myths endure not because they are true, but because they speak to truths within us. And with that, we close the scroll on our Spartan saga. Sleep well, and may your dreams be as epic as the stories of old. In the heart of the 6th century, Constantinople was the glittering jewel of the Byzantine Empire, a city so impressive it could make Rome look like a quaint country village. This bustling metropolis, overflowing with traders, scholars, and the Ard Street philosopher spouting wisdom or nonsense, depending on your perspective, was the stage for the ambitious reign of Justinian I. Picture a city alive with the cacophony of languages, the clatter of chariots, and the constant hum of commerce, a place where fortunes were made and lost faster than you could say Byzantine bureaucracy. Justinian, whose reign kicked off in 527 AD, wasn't your average emperor. He had a vision as grand as the city itself. He was determined to reclaim the lost glory of the Roman Empire, which, let's be honest, had seen better days. Born a stone's throw away from the empire in what is today North Macedonia, Justinian was the nephew of Emperor Justin I. Talk about connections, right? He rose to power not through the usual bloody coup or scandalous intrigue, but because his uncle had a soft spot for him, not unlike that uncle who teaches you the ropes of the family business. Now, Justinian wasn't flying solo in his quest for glory. Enter Theodora, his wife and co-emperor, a woman as formidable as she was fascinating. If Netflix ever needed a leading lady for a historical drama, Theodora would be it. Before her rise to power, she had a career in the theater, not the Broadway kind, but let's just say it involved less Shakespeare and more spectacle. She was sharp, politically savvy, and not afraid to speak her mind, which was quite the feat in a world where women were often seen and not heard. Together, they were the ultimate power couple, more Beyoncé and Jay-Z than Barney and Clyde. Theodora's influence was undeniable, and her partnership with Justinian was a game-changer. She had a knack for social reform, advocating for women's rights, which was as radical then as it sounds now. Her policies included laws against forced prostitution and greater protections for women in divorce. She was, in many ways, centuries ahead of her time. Their reign wasn't just about grand ambitions and social reforms, though. It was also about bricks and mortar. Justinian had a penchant for construction projects that would make even the most ambitious modern city planners break into a sweat. The crown jewel of his architectural endeavors was the Hagia Sophia, a basilica so magnificent that it became the world's largest cathedral for nearly 1,000 years. With its massive dome hanging like a celestial chandelier over the city, it was a testament to Justinian's vision and the empire's engineering prowess. Building it was no small feat and reportedly cost around 20,000 pounds of gold, a sum that could bankroll several small nations today. But beneath the marble and mosaics, Constantinople was a city teetering on the edge of chaos. The socio-political climate was as volatile as a reality TV reunion show. The city was caught in the grip of two major factions, the Blues and the Greens. Unlike your typical political parties, these groups were initially chariot racing fans. Think of them as the die-hard sports fans of their day, only with more daggers and fewer foam fingers. Their rivalry often spilled over into the streets, leading to riots that could make modern football hooliganism look like a garden party. The Nika riots of 532 AD were a prime example of just how quickly things could spiral out of control. What started as a protest against the arrest of two chariot racers turned into a full-blown insurrection, with the city engulfed in flames and chaos. The riots lasted for over a week, leaving tens of thousands dead and much of the city in ruins. In a move that would make any crisis manager proud, Justinian, with Theodora's persuasive encouragement, didn't flee the city. Instead, he faced the rioters down, eventually quelling the uprising with a mixture of negotiation. Well, brute force. Despite the chaos, Justinian's reign marked a high point in Byzantine history, characterized by a legal overhaul known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Justinian Code. This monumental work consolidated centuries of Roman legal thought into a coherent system, laying the groundwork for many modern legal systems today. But here's the kicker. While Justinian was trying to bring order to the empire through law, he and Theodora were simultaneously navigating a court filled with intrigue and betrayal that would make Game of Thrones look like a family sitcom. So, as the sun set on the 6th century, the Byzantine Empire stood as a testament to the ambitions and contradictions of its rulers. Justinian and Theodora had left a mark on history that would echo through the ages, a blend of triumph, tragedy, and transformation wrapped up in the marble and mystery of Constantinople. As empires go, theirs was one for the books, just not always the fairy tale kind. And so, with Constantinople's skyline dominated by the gleaming dome of the Hagia Sophia and the echoes of the Nika riots slowly fading, Justinian turned his gaze westward. To him, the splintered remains of the once mighty Roman Empire were like a jigsaw puzzle missing a few pieces, and he was determined to find them all. Enter General Belisarius, Justinian's military maestro, a man with a knack for turning battlefields into chessboards. If Justinian was the visionary, then Belisarius was his master tactician, the kind of guy you'd want on your side in a bar fight, or, a massive imperial reconquest. Belisarius was tasked with the seemingly impossible, reclaiming the territories that once shone under the Roman sun, but were now under the shadow of barbarian rule. His military campaign kicked off with the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. Now, the Vandals weren't just any ragtag group. They were the folks who sacked Rome in 455 AD, leaving a mark on history so indelible that their name became synonymous with wanton destruction. But by 533 AD, they were ripe for the picking, thanks to internal squabbles and a ruler, King Gelimer, whose political savvy was about as sharp as a butter knife. With a fleet of 500 ships carrying approximately 50,000 soldiers, Belisarius set sail across the Mediterranean, a journey that, on a good day, was less a cruise and more a test of endurance for seasick soldiers. The logistics of moving such a number of troops and horses were staggering. Imagine coordinating a massive game of risk, except with real stakes and no ability to pause for a bathroom break. Supplies had to be meticulously planned, not just for the journey, but for sustaining an army in a foreign land. Food, weapons, and the all-important wine had to be accounted for, because if there was one thing a Roman soldier needed after a day of battle, it was a decent cup of vino. The Battle of Ad Decimum marked the beginning of the end for the Vandals. Belisarius, with his uncanny ability to predict his enemy's move, set a cunning trap that caught Gelimer off guard, leading to a decisive Byzantine victory. The Vandals were marched out of Carthage faster than you could say, Reconquista. And just like that, North Africa was back under Roman, Byzantine rule. This wasn't just a military triumph, it was an economic windfall. North Africa was a fertile breadbasket, and its return to the empire meant a steady supply of grain to feed the ever-hungry mouths of Constantinople. With the ink still drying on his North African success, Belisarius turned his attention to Italy. The Ostrogoths, another Germanic tribe, had made themselves quite comfortable in Italy, but they were about to receive an eviction notice courtesy of Justinian's dynamic duo. The campaign in Italy was less a blitzkrieg and more a grind, a chess game played over years rather than days. Beginning in 535 AD, Belisarius and his troops launched an assault that would see the eternal city of Rome change hands multiple times over the course of 2 decades. The city itself was a shadow of its former glory, more ghost town than bustling metropolis, but its symbolic value was priceless. Here's where the romanticized notions of chivalric conquest get tossed out the window. Warfare in the 6th century was far from the gallant duels sung about in medieval ballads. It was brutal, bloody, and often downright miserable. The siege of Rome was a drawn-out affair, with Belisarius and his men digging in for the long haul. Supplies were tight, and disease was as deadly as any sword. Imagine trying to keep morale high when half your troops are laid low by dysentery. Not exactly the stuff of epic poems. And yet, through sheer tenacity and strategic brilliance, Belisarius managed to capture key cities like Naples and Milan, inching ever closer to total victory. The Goths, meanwhile, weren't just sitting ducks. They put up a fierce resistance, led by their king, Totila, whose tactical acumen made him a formidable foe. The back-and-forth struggle over Italy saw entire cities razed and rebuilt, a testament to the destructive cycle of war that left scars on the landscape as well as on its people. As much as these campaigns were about reclaiming territory, they were also a test of the Byzantine Empire's ability to project power over vast distances. The logistics were nightmarish. Troops had to be moved across thousands of miles of hostile territory, supply lines had to be secured, and communication was slower than a carrier pigeon on a lazy Sunday. It was like trying to run a multinational corporation with nothing but handwritten notes and a lot of hope. Despite these challenges, Justinian's ambitions didn't waver. His vision of a reunited Roman Empire was tantalizingly close, yet the cost was high. Empire's coffers were drained by the continuous military campaigns, and the strain on its resources was palpable. Maintaining an empire that stretched from the Pillars of Hercules to the sands of Syria demanded more than just military might. It required a robust economy and a stable political climate, neither of which Justinian could count on indefinitely. Still, as the 6th century rolled on, the Byzantine Empire under Justinian was at its zenith. The reconquests were, for the most part, successful, and the empire's borders had swelled to include much of the Mediterranean basin. Belisarius returned to Constantinople as a hero, though in true Byzantine fashion, his successes stirred envy and suspicion, leading to political machinations that saw him fall from grace more than once. Even in triumph, the empire was a place where intrigue and betrayal lurked around every corner. Yet for all its achievements, the empire was like a house of cards, impressive to behold, but vulnerable to the slightest tremor. The reconquests, while glorious, had stretched the empire to its limits, and the dream of a restored Roman Empire was as fragile as it was grand. Justinian's legacy was built on a foundation of ambition and contradiction, a tapestry woven with threads of triumph and tragedy. As the empire expanded, so too did the challenges that would define its future, setting the stage for the next chapter in its tumultuous history. But for now, the Byzantine Empire basked in the glow of its hard-won victories, its story far from over but richer for the tales yet to be told. And so, as the Byzantine Empire basked in the glow of its hard-won victories, Justinian turned his attention inward, to the very marrow of the empire, its laws and economy. Now, if the world of 6th century legislation sounds about as thrilling as watching paint dry, think again. Justinian's legal overhaul, the Corpus Juris Civilis, wasn't just a collection of dusty scrolls. It was a revolutionary blueprint for law and order, the kind of reform that could make even the most jaded bureaucrats sit up and pay attention. Picture this, an empire sprawling across continents, each region clinging to its patchwork of local laws like a toddler to a favorite blanket. It was chaos central, with legal contradictions popping up faster than a game of whack-a-mole. Enter Justinian, with a vision to streamline this legal cacophony into a coherent system. The Justinian Code was the Netflix of its day, consolidating centuries of Roman legal thought into a single, binge-worthy collection. It wasn't just about ancient arcana. It laid the groundwork for many modern legal systems, from Europe to the Americas. Not bad for a guy who probably never imagined his work would be the backbone of future bar exams and courtroom dramas. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of reform. The reality was that Justinian's legal overhaul was as much about power as it was about progress. By centralizing legal authority, he strengthened the emperor's grip on the far-flung provinces. It was a savvy move, a reminder that in politics, as in poker, sometimes you've got to know when to hold M and when to fold M. Justinian was stacking the deck in his favor, ensuring that even as his armies marched across distant lands, his influence at home remained unassailable. Yet while the legal world was getting a makeover, the economic landscape was less glamorous. Think of it as a medieval version of lifestyles of the rich and famous, but with fewer yachts and more plague. The Byzantine economy was a house of cards propped up by trade, taxes, and the ever-present threat of war. The wars of reconquest, while glorious in song and story, were bleeding the imperial treasury drier than a desert summer. The military campaigns had cost a king's ransom, literally. Historians estimate that the wars drained the empire of vast sums, with numbers reaching into the millions of solidi, the gold coins of the realm. It was the kind of spending binge that would make even the most profligate spenders blush. Justinian's infrastructure projects, though grand, were another financial black hole. The Hagia Sophia alone swallowed 20,000 pounds of gold, a staggering sum that could have funded a small moon landing. And that was just the tip of the architectural iceberg. Roads, aqueducts, and fortifications sprouted across the empire like mushrooms after rain, each one a testament to Justinian's ambition and his empire's strained purse strings. But no discussion of economic realities in Justinian's era would be complete without mentioning the elephant in the room, the plague. The Justinianic plague, as it came to be known, swept through the empire in the 540 like a grim reaper on overtime. It's estimated that the plague killed off about 25 to 50 million people, roughly half the population of Europe at the time. To put that in perspective, imagine if half the people in a modern metropolis just vanished. The impact on the workforce and urban life was catastrophic. Fields lay fallow, workshops went silent, and the bustling streets of Constantinople echoed with emptiness. The plague didn't just decimate the population, it gutted the economy. With fewer hands to work the land and man the ships, agriculture and trade took a nosedive. The empire's tax base shrank faster than a wool sweater in hot water, leaving Justinian scrambling to keep his grand projects afloat. It was a harsh reminder that even the most visionary leaders are at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Yet in the face of these challenges, the Byzantine Empire soldiered on. Justinian's economic strategies, though fraught with peril, were a testament to his indomitable will. He introduced new taxes, reformed the currency, and sought to control prices in an attempt to stabilize the economy. It was a bit like trying to patch a leaky ship with duct tape, admirable, but not always effective. And while the Justinian Code brought order to the legal chaos, the reality of daily life in Constantinople was a far cry from the orderly world of legal scrolls. At the heart of it all was the stark contrast between the empire's grandeur and the harsh economic realities of the time. Justinian's reign was a paradox, a blend of triumph and hardship, a reminder that even in the most glittering palaces, the foundations are often built on shaky ground. The streets of Constantinople might have been paved with ambition, but they were also littered with the detritus of economic struggle and the spectre of disease. And so, as the 6th century continued its inexorable march, the Byzantine Empire stood at a crossroads. Justinian's legacy was a tapestry woven with threads of both victory and vulnerability. The empire's future hung in the balance, a testament to the enduring complexity of history's greatest empires. As much as it was a time of transformation, it was also a time of uncertainty, setting the stage for the next act in this epic saga, a chapter yet to be written, but destined to be as captivating as the last. Amidst the chaos of empire building and economic juggling, Justinian had yet another Herculean task on his hands, unifying Christianity. Now, before you imagine him as some benevolent unifier holding hands with bishops under a rainbow of ecclesiastical harmony, let's set the record straight. Justinian's approach was more iron fist than open arms, like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle by jamming the pieces together until they fit or break. In Justinian's Byzantine world, Christianity wasn't just a faith, it was an instrument of imperial policy. The emperor saw himself as God's appointed enforcer on earth, which sounds grand until you realize it involved a lot of finger-wagging and heresy hunting. Justinian wanted a singular, orthodox version of Christianity, a spiritual monolith as towering and unyielding as the Hagia Sophia's dome. But the reality was more like a theological tug-of-war with more factions than a medieval version of Survivor. Now, Justinian's version of Christianity was rooted in the decisions of the Council of Chalcedon back in 451 AD. This council declared that Christ had two natures, divine and human, cohabiting in one person. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. This declaration was about as popular in some regions as a lead balloon. And to the Monophysites, a group that believed Christ had a single divine nature, an idea that found fertile ground in Egypt, Syria, and Armenia. To Justinian, this was heresy with a capital H, and he wasn't about to let it slide. Cue the imperial muscle. Justinian launched what can only be described as a theological crackdown. Monophysite leaders were exiled faster than you could say ecumenical council. Churches were seized, and monasteries were brought to heel. The emperor's missives on orthodoxy were dispatched with the urgency of ancient spam mail, leaving no bishop unbothered. It was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about keeping the empire's religious ducks in a row. But here's the rub. Despite his best efforts, the dream of a unified Christian empire was just that, a dream. The religious landscape was as fragmented as a Byzantine mosaic. Regional loyalties ran deep, and the more Justinian pushed for unity, the more resistance he encountered. His efforts to impose orthodoxy often led to deeper schisms, proving that you can't always legislate belief, no matter how many scrolls you unfurl. Now, let's talk architecture. because nothing says imperial propaganda quite like a few tons of marble and some strategically placed mosaics. Justinian was a master of using architecture to broadcast his divine mandate. The Hagia Sophia wasn't just a cathedral, it was a statement. With its massive dome seemingly suspended by divine will alone, the basilica was a breathtaking testament to imperial power and religious unity, or at least the illusion of it. Built between 532 and 537 AD, the Hagia Sophia wasn't just a place of worship. It was a cosmic symbol, a visual sermon that screamed, "Look upon my works, ye mighty," and despair. The sheer scale of the project was staggering. It involved thousands of laborers, meticulous planning, and enough gold to make a dragon envious. 20,000 pounds to be exact. But it wasn't just about the gold leaf and glitter. The basilica's innovative design, with its cascading domes and ethereal light, was meant to inspire awe, and let's be honest, a bit of envy from rival powers. But here's the kicker. While the Hagia Sophia stood as a beacon of imperial ambition, the reality beneath its shining surface was far from harmonious. The construction itself wasn't without its hiccups, earthquakes, structural issues, and the occasional worker strike. And despite its grandeur, the church couldn't paper over the empire's divisions. The Hagia Sophia was as much a monument to Justinian's ego as it was to his faith, a reminder that divine splendor doesn't always translate to earthly unity. Despite these challenges, Justinian pressed on with his imperial makeover. His building projects extended beyond the walls of Constantinople. Cities across the empire saw new churches, fortifications, and civic buildings rise from the ground, each one a brick-and-mortar declaration of the emperor's divine right to rule. It was a strategy of imperial branding, a way to leave his mark on the landscape as indelible as the Roman roads that crisscrossed the empire. Yet, for all this architectural bravado, the Byzantine Empire was like a beautifully crafted vase with a hairline crack. The illusion of unity was just that, an illusion. Religious conflicts simmered beneath the surface, and Justinian's heavy-handed approach only served to deepen the divides. His reign was a paradox, a blend of triumph and turmoil, where the grandeur of his projects masked the underlying fractures in the empire's spiritual and social fabric. As Justinian's era marched on, the Byzantine Empire found itself at a crossroads. The emperor's efforts to unite Christianity and solidify his rule were a testament to his vision, but they also highlighted the limits of imperial power. While the Hagia Sophia gleamed in the sunlight and the empire's borders stretched far and wide, the seeds of discord were already sown, setting the stage for the next act in this historical drama. As much as Justinian sought to control his world, the reality was as fragmented as the empire's many provinces, a reminder that the quest for unity is as elusive as it is enduring. So, as the 6th century drew to a close, the Byzantine Empire stood as a testament to the ambitions and contradictions of its ruler. Justinian's legacy was a tapestry woven with threads of triumph and trial, a blend of light and shadow that would echo through the ages. The story of his reign was far from over, its next chapter already taking shape in the fractured landscape of faith and power. As the curtain fell on Justinian's reign, the Byzantine Empire stood at a crossroads, its legacy a patchwork of ambition and adversity. Justinian's era was like a Byzantine mosaic, dazzling from afar, but a jumble of contradictions up close. His ambitious projects had stitched the empire together with threads of law, architecture, and conquest, but they also stretched the imperial fabric to its limits. First, let's tackle the myth versus reality of Justinian's legendary rule. The romanticized version paints him as a near-mythical figure, an emperor with the Midas touch, turning everything to gold. In reality, while he did reforge parts of the Roman Empire, his touch sometimes left the imperial treasury looking more like a piggy bank after a toddler's shopping spree. His wars of reconquest alone drained millions of solidi, and while the Hagia Sophia was a marvel, it was also a financial black hole that gobbled up resources like a hungry, stone-clad beast. And then there's the Justinian Code, hailed as a cornerstone of modern legal systems. While it certainly was a monumental legal achievement, let's not pretend Justinian was the altruistic lawgiver some texts imply. The code was as much about tightening his control over the sprawling empire as it was about justice. By consolidating legal authority, He ensured that his hand reached even the furthest provinces, a medieval version of Big Brother is watching. Politically, Justinian's reign set a precedent both glorified and feared by future Byzantine leaders. His reconquest showed the empire's military might, but also highlighted the strains of overreach. The empire's borders, expanded to include much of the Mediterranean basin, were as impressive as they were indefensible. Future emperors learned the hard way that maintaining such vast territories required more than just armies. It needed a robust economy and political stability, neither of which Justinian could conjure by sheer will. Socially, Justinian's era was a crucible of transformation. He and Theodora led social reforms that were ahead of their time, advocating for women's rights and expanding social welfare. Yet, these advancements were often overshadowed by the harsh realities of political intrigue and religious discord. His attempts to unify Christianity were like trying to herd a pack of feral cats, commendable in theory, but in practice, they only deepened the religious schisms that plagued the empire for centuries to come. Economically, the empire was on a roller coaster that felt more like a freefall at times. The Justinianic plague, a grim reaper on a spree, decimated the population and left the economy in tatters. With fewer taxpayers and a gutted workforce, the empire's financial underpinnings were as shaky as a game of Jenga in an earthquake. Justinian's attempts at economic reforms, like introducing new taxes and controlling prices, were desperate measures, akin to plugging a sinking ship with chewing gum. The lasting impacts of Justinian's reign weren't all doom and gloom, though his architectural legacy, epitomized by structures like the Hagia Sophia, set the bar for Byzantine architecture and influenced the course of ecclesiastical design for generations. His military campaigns, while costly, temporarily restored the Roman Empire's glory and demonstrated the Byzantine military's tactical prowess, lessons that would echo through the corridors of power for centuries. As for Justinian himself, his legacy is a mirror reflecting both the romance of his accomplishments and the reality of his excesses. He was a visionary, but one whose dreams often outpaced practicalities. His reign was a testament to the transient nature of power, a reminder that empires, no matter how grand, are built on fragile foundations. In modern terms, Justinian's story is a cautionary tale about balancing vision with practicality. Empires, like ambitious startups, require a solid business plan, not just grand ideas. It's not enough to dream big. One must also ensure the resources and stability to sustain those dreams. Justinian's reign illustrates that the line between triumph and tragedy is often thinner than a Byzantine gold coin. Ultimately, Justinian's Byzantine Empire was a complex tapestry of contradictions, an empire of grand designs and equally grand dilemmas. His legacy is a reminder that history is not just about the stories we tell, but the lessons we learn. As we reflect on his reign, we see the enduring struggle of leaders to balance vision with reality, ambition with sustainability, a dance as old as empires themselves and just as relevant today. If you think your daily commute is rough, spare a thought for the Incas. Their empire stretched across the Andes, a mountain range so formidable it makes the Rockies look like a gentle hillside. These peaks, reaching altitudes over 22,000 feet, are less Sunday stroll and more vertical marathon. Yet, around 1438, the Incas didn't just survive here, they thrived. And they did it with more style and ingenuity than a reality TV home makeover. Let's set the scene. Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui, the man who might as well have had Empire Builder on his resume, kicks off what we now call the Inca Empire. Before Pachacuti came along, the Incas were just another group in the Andes, minding their own business and dealing with the everyday trials of living in a place where flat ground is about as common as affordable rent in a major city. But Pachacuti had ambitions taller than the Andes themselves. Now, you might think that building an empire on top of the world involves some serious real estate challenges. And you'd be right. The Incas looked at those steep, rocky slopes and thought, challenge accepted. Terrace farming was their ace in the hole, transforming the Andes into giant staircases of fertile land. By carving flat steps into the mountainsides, they not only increased the arable land, but also created a functional and artistic landscape. These terraces helped manage water runoff and reduced erosion, making them the eco-friendly gardeners of the 15th century. But if you're thinking they just sat in their terraces sipping chicha, think again. The Incas were the road warriors of ancient times, building a network of roads that spanned over 25,000 miles. That's right, 25,000 miles. To put that in perspective, that's just shy of the Earth's circumference. These roads connected the empire's far-flung regions, ensuring that the Incas' message, whether it was a declaration of war or an invitation to the annual festival, got through faster than your last Amazon delivery. And all this without the wheel. Who needs a wheel when llamas are your primary mode of transport? Am I right? The Incas' roadways weren't just functional. They were feats of engineering genius. Bridges made of woven grass spanned deep gorges, showcasing a level of craftsmanship that would have made any modern-day civil engineer weep with envy. One such bridge, the Huachuaca, still exists today, rebuilt annually by local communities to honor their ancestors' ingenuity. Of course, building an empire isn't just about infrastructure. It's about power, politics, and occasionally a bit of conquest. Pachacuti was not above a little strategic expansion. With a mix of diplomacy, marriage alliances, and when necessary, a good old-fashioned military campaign, he expanded Inca control over neighboring territories. His name, meaning Earthshaker, wasn't just for show. Under his rule, the empire expanded rapidly, covering parts of modern-day Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, and Colombia. Yet the Incas weren't just conquerors, they were absorbers of culture. Instead of bulldozing over the traditions of conquered peoples, the Incas incorporated them. This approach created a tapestry of languages, customs, and religions under Inca governance. It was less my way or the highway and more our way, but with your favorite toppings. Sure, the Incas have been romanticized as benevolent rulers, but let's not kid ourselves. The empire was also a well-oiled machine of control, with a centralized bureaucracy that would make any modern government proud. At its heart was the Sapa Inca, the emperor seen as a direct descendant of the sun god in time. This divine right not only justified his rule, but also ensured a level of obedience that would make even the most demanding boss seem like a pushover. So, as we wrap up this first part of our journey through the Inca Empire, remember, they were more than just mountain dwellers with a penchant for gold and llamas. They were masters of adaptation, blending innovation with tradition to create one of history's most impressive empires. And it all started with Pachacuti, the visionary who saw potential where others saw only insurmountable peaks. And speaking of seeing potential, let's talk about how the Incas didn't just build an empire. They engineered a civilization fueled by one of the most unique economic engines in history. Forget the idea of gold coins clinking in leather pouches. The Incas were all about that labor economy. Their currency, sweat equity, my friends. And to the meter system, a form of taxation that would make even the most creative modern accountant scratch their head in admiration. So, what was meter, you ask? In the simplest terms, it was a labor tax. Instead of shelling out silver or gold, the common folk were required to contribute their time and skills to state projects. Imagine paying your taxes by showing up for a community construction gig. And we're not talking about just any projects. We're talking about building roads that stretched as far as 24,800 miles, constructing agricultural terraces, and in some cases, working the quarries to chip out those massive stones for Machu Picchu. It was as if the entire empire was one giant, unpaid internship, except with a bit more prestige and a lot more physical labor. The genius of the meter system was that it turned labor into the lifeblood of the empire. It wasn't just about keeping the roads in tip-top shape or making sure the emperor's new summer residence had the finest stonework. It was about creating an infrastructure that could support the sprawling empire, ensuring that resources and messages flowed as smoothly as possible. Without the wheel or beasts of burden like horses or oxen, the Incas relied on their people and the trusty llama to move goods and information. Think of it as a pre-Columbian Amazon prime, but without the environmental guilt. Speaking of those 24,800 miles of roads, let's address the elephant, or rather, the alpaca in the room. How did they pull this off without the wheel? The answer lies in the Incas' sheer engineering prowess and communal effort. The roads were more than mere paths. They were the empire's circulatory system, vital for its survival. And they were built to last, with stone paving, drainage systems, and in some places, steps carved into the rock for those steep mountain climbs. If you thought your gym stairmaster was a workout, try carrying a llama up the Andes. All this infrastructure wasn't just for show. It was the backbone that allowed the Incas to maintain control over their empire. The roads enabled rapid troop movements, facilitated trade, and helped integrate the diverse cultures and languages under Inca rule. This connectivity was vital for an empire that, believe it or not, had no written language. That's right. No alphabet, no scrolls, no dusty tomes. Information was recorded and transmitted orally or through a system of knotted strings called quippers. Picture a data spreadsheet, but in the form of a colorful macrame project. But let's not romanticize too much. The meter system, while innovative, was no walk in the Andean park. It was demanding, and those who shirked their duties faced harsh penalties. The system could be grueling, especially when it involved working in the empire's mines. Take Potosi, for example, a silver-rich peak that became a veritable factory of wealth for the empire, and later for the Spanish. The conditions were brutal, and many paid the ultimate price for their labor. And yet, despite these hardships, the system worked. The Incas managed to keep their vast empire as tightly knit as a llama wool sweater, without the need for a common currency or a written language. It was a testament to their organizational skills and their ability to inspire or enforce cooperation among their subjects. Of course, power in the Inca Empire wasn't just about who could swing a hammer or carry a stone. The Sapa Inca, perched atop the societal pyramid, was the Sun King himself, ruling with a divine mandate. His word was law, and his ability to mobilize the population was unmatched. The Incas' ability to manage such a sprawling domain with relatively little internal strife was nothing short of miraculous, given the logistical nightmare it could have been. But don't be fooled into thinking it was all sunshine and rainbows, or rather, sun and maize. The Incas' efficient system masked the iron grip of control that held the empire together. It's easy to romanticize their achievements, but the reality was a complex tapestry of power, labor, and survival in one of the planet's harshest environments. So, as we marvel at their stonework and road networks, let's remember the human cost and effort that went into creating such wonders. The Inca Empire was a masterpiece of organization and ingenuity, but it was also a testament to the lengths humans will go to both control and create. Next time you grumble about your morning commute, just think back to the Incas, those real road warriors of history, who made it all happen with nothing more than muscle, manpower, and a bit of llama finesse. And as we leave this part of the story open, there's still plenty more to uncover about their society, culture, and how they managed to keep such a monumental empire ticking without penning a single word. Stay tuned, because the tale of the Incas has many more twists and turns, much like their legendary roads. So, with the ink barely dry on our recap of Inca ingenuity, let's dive headfirst into the empire's social and political fabric, a tapestry as complex as a Game of Thrones plotline, but with fewer dragons and more llamas. At the heart of it all was the Sapa Inca, the emperor who made every CEO look like they were managing a lemonade stand by comparison. This guy wasn't just the ruler, he was basically a living god. Picture a combination of a rock star, religious leader, and ultimate authority, all wrapped up in a poncho of divine right. The Sapa Inca's status as a demigod wasn't just ceremonial fluff, it was the linchpin of centralized control. His word was law, and his decisions were literally seen as heavenly mandates. If the Sapa Inca said jump, you didn't ask, how high? You asked, how many mountains do you want me to leap over? This divine aura wasn't just a nice perk, it was essential for maintaining the empire's cohesion. With the Andes as your boardroom, keeping everyone on the same page required more than just a strong Wi-Fi connection. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Sapa Inca needed a crack team to hold this colossal empire together. Enter the Inca bureaucracy, a network of administrators who could teach modern corporate managers a thing or two about efficiency. These were the real MVPs, the unsung heroes who ensured that the empire's gears kept turning smoothly. They were like the ultimate project managers, coordinating everything from agricultural output to tax collection with a precision that would make even the most meticulous accountant blush. Now, you might be wondering, how did they keep this machine running without email chains or Slack channels? The answer, my friend, lies in the quipu, a series of knotted cords that made Excel spreadsheets look like a toddler's coloring book. These were the Incas' version of data storage, used to account for everything from census data to the logistics of llama caravans. Imagine trying to convey the entire stock inventory of an Amazon warehouse using just a handful of string and a lot of patience. In this well-oiled system, the administrators played a role akin to middle management. They were crucial for maintaining order, ensuring that the empire's vast resources were allocated where needed. They were also the conduits of the Sapa Inca's will, implementing policies that kept the empire running like a finely tuned chariot. And let's not forget, they managed this without the benefit of an MBA or even a notebook. Just sheer organizational prowess and a lot of wool. But as impressive as this system was, it wasn't all sunshine and temple festivals. The myth of Inca invincibility often glosses over the fact that this empire, like any, had its share of vulnerabilities. While it's tempting to imagine the Incas as an unstoppable force, the truth is their power was as much about diplomacy as it was about military might. In some ways, they were the ultimate diplomats, more likely to seal a deal with a marriage alliance than with a battle cry. You see, the Incas were aces at the ancient game of mergers and acquisitions. When faced with a new territory, they didn't just roll in with an army. Instead, they often offered a sort of join us, and we'll make you an offer you can't refuse deal. Local leaders could keep their status and lands as long as they pledged allegiance to the Sapa Inca. It was like the most intense round of corporate negotiations you've ever seen, only with more feathers and ritual sacrifices. This strategy of integration wasn't just practical, it was necessary. The empire was a mosaic of cultures, languages, and traditions, and ruling through brute force alone would have been a logistical nightmare. The Incas knew that diplomacy could achieve what swords could not: stability. By incorporating local customs and leaders into the fold, they created an empire that was both vast and remarkably cohesive. It was a win-win strategy that kept the peace and expanded their influence. Of course, not every negotiation went smoothly. When diplomacy failed, the Incas were more than capable of flexing their military muscle. But their reliance on alliances underscores a fundamental truth. No empire is invincible. The Incas understood that their strength lay in unity, in building bridges, both literal and metaphorical, across the empire. And let's be real, this approach to empire building makes a lot of sense even today. Modern businesses could learn a thing or two from the Incas' emphasis on mergers over hostile takeovers. When you're dealing with a vast and diverse territory, cooperation often beats competition. It's a strategy that ensured the Inca Empire's longevity, at least until the Spanish showed up with their guns, germs, and steel. So, as we peel back the layers of Inca society, we see a complex network held together by divine authority, sharp diplomacy, and a bureaucracy that would make any modern government green with envy. It's a reminder that history isn't just about grand narratives and towering monuments. It's about the people and systems that made it all possible. And as we continue this journey, remember, the Incas were masters of their domain, but even they had to navigate the tricky waters of politics and power. Stay tuned, because there's still more to uncover about how they managed this empire of extremes, balancing divine mandates with down-to-earth realities. And speaking of balancing divine mandates with down-to-earth realities, let's pivot to the heart of what made the Inca Empire tick, their cultural and religious life. Think of it as the glue that held this sprawling civilization together, like the mystical force binding the galaxy in Star Wars, but with more sun worship and fewer lightsabers. At the center of this cosmic glue was Intai, the sun god, whose rays shone brighter than any Hollywood spotlight. Now, if you thought the Sapa Inca had a god complex, wait until you meet Intai. This deity wasn't just any celestial body. He was the source of all warmth and life, the cosmic CEO of the Inca pantheon. The Incas didn't just tip their hats to the sun. They built an entire city, Cusco, in his honor. The Coricancha, or Golden Enclosure, was the temple dedicated to Intai, and was so lavishly adorned with gold that it would have made King Midas jealous. Picture it, walls covered in sheets of gold, reflecting sunlight like a beacon of divine bling. This wasn't just about aesthetics, though. The Incas believed Intai's favor ensured bountiful harvests and prosperity, which is a pretty solid insurance policy when your empire sprawls across terrain that's more peaks and valleys than a roller coaster ride. To keep the sun god smiling, the Incas threw festivals that would rival any modern-day music festival in scale and spectacle. The most famous of these was Inti Raymi, the Festival of the Sun. Held during the winter solstice, it was a celebration of renewal and a plea for Inti's return to center stage, lest the crops decide to take a sabbatical. These festivals weren't just feel-good get-togethers. They were critical for unifying the diverse cultures under Inca rule. Picture a massive party where everyone brings their cultural flair to the table, creating a melting pot of traditions that would make any multicultural fair look like a backyard BBQ. It was a time when the empire's subjects, from the coast to the highlands, could come together, bond over shared rituals, and perhaps even trade a few llama jokes. But let's address the elephant, or should I say, the sacrificial llama, in the room. The Incas' religious practices have often been painted with a broad brush dipped in red, depicting them as bloodthirsty ritualists. It's true that sacrifices were part of the religious toolkit, but let's not blow it out of proportion like a tabloid headline. In reality, human sacrifices were relatively rare and reserved for significant events like the crowning of a new Sapa Inca or during a natural disaster when convincing the guards to chill out was a high-stakes affair. Most offerings were far less grim. The Incas frequently sacrificed llamas, guinea pigs, and even lavish textiles. They believed these gifts would appease the guards without needing a full-blown horror show. It's a bit like choosing between a heartfelt gift and an extravagant spectacle. Sometimes it's the thought that counts, even in the spiritual realm. Now, let's talk about the Incas' view of the afterlife, which was as much about legacy as it was about eternity. The Incas believed in an existence beyond this world, where the soul's fate hinged on how well you lived your life. Good behavior and dutiful service to the empire could land you in the sun's warm embrace, while less virtuous souls might find themselves in a colder, darker place. It was a moral system that kept society in check, with the prospect of eternal sunshine serving as the ultimate carrot on a stick. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. The Incas had a unique take on ancestral worship that would make any modern-day genealogist weep with envy. Mummification was a big deal, not just for the elite, but for anyone who had a significant role in society. These mummies weren't tucked away in dusty tombs. They were brought out during festivals, treated as living kin, and even consulted on important matters. Imagine your grandma chiming in on family debates from beyond the grave, a scenario that's both spooky and comforting. This practice kept the past alive, literally, and ensured that the ancestors remained an integral part of daily life. It was a way of maintaining continuity, connecting the living with the wisdom of those who came before. And in a world as unpredictable as the Andes, having a few extra voices of experience wasn't just appreciated, it was essential. So, as we delve deeper into the Incas' spiritual world, we see a complex tapestry woven with threads of faith, tradition, and pragmatism. Their religious practices were not just about appeasing deities or ensuring good harvests. They were about sustaining a sense of unity and purpose across a diverse and sprawling empire. It's a reminder that, while we may not be worshipping the sun or consulting mummified ancestors today, the core human desire for connection and meaning remains constant through the ages. As we continue our journey through the Inca Empire, remember that their story is not just one of conquests and construction, but of a civilization striving to find harmony between the earthly and the divine. Stay tuned, because the Incas' cultural legacy has more layers than an Andean poncho, and there's still much more to uncover. While the Inca Empire's cultural legacy was a rich tapestry of sun worship and ancestor reverence, the dawn of the 16th century brought a storm that even their most elaborate rituals couldn't stave off. Enter Francisco Pizarro, the conquistador who, in 1532, sailed into the Inca world like a wrecking ball in conquistador armor. With him, Pizarro brought not just a thirst for gold, but a cascade of chaos that would unravel an empire that had stretched its tendrils across the Andes like a giant, stone-wielding octopus. When Pizarro arrived, the Inca Empire was already teetering on the brink of a family feud that made keeping up with the Kardashians look like a nursery rhyme. The empire was knee-deep in a civil war between two brothers, Atahualpa and Huascar, each with ambitions bigger than the Andes themselves. This was a classic case of sibling rivalry on steroids, with both brothers claiming the right to be the Sapa Inca. Their spat wasn't about who got the last piece of llama jerky, but rather who got to sit on the golden throne of Cusco, the empire's heart and soul. While the brothers were busy tearing each other apart, Pizarro was wading in the wings, rubbing his hands with glee. The Spanish, armed with steel, gunpowder, and diseases that would make today's hypochondriacs shiver in their boots, found an empire already weakened by internal strife. For the Incas, it was like trying to fend off a hurricane with a poncho. Let's talk numbers. Pizarro had fewer than 200 men. The Incas, they boasted an army of tens of thousands. But Pizarro had a secret weapon, smallpox, the silent conqueror. This disease, along with measles and influenza, decimated the Inca population faster than you can say guinea pig stew. These were pathogens the Incas had never encountered, and they spread through the empire with the efficiency of a modern-day viral cat video. It was the ultimate blindside, an invisible adversary that struck down rulers and commoners alike, leaving the social order in shambles. And then there's the infamous meeting at Cajamarca. Picture the scene. Atahualpa, fresh from victory over his brother, meets Pizarro in a seemingly innocuous plaza. Unarmed and confident, Atahualpa expected a diplomatic chat. Instead, he got an ambush that would make any game of Risk look like child's play. Pizarro's men, hidden and armed to the teeth, launched a surprise attack that captured Atahualpa and turned the tide of history with the precision of a well-timed chess move. The ransom for Atahualpa's release was legendary. A room filled with gold and 2 with silver, enough to make even the most extravagant of emperors raise an eyebrow. The Incas complied, delivering a fortune that would make any Las Vegas casino look like a penny arcade. But here's the twist. Despite receiving the riches, Pizarro executed Atahualpa anyway. It was a classic case of double-crossing that would make Machiavelli proud. With Atahualpa gone, the empire was leaderless, rudderless, and ripe for the picking. The Spanish quickly swept through the Inca lands, toppling cities and claiming territory with the vicious efficiency of a corporate takeover. By 1572, with the capture of the last Inca stronghold at Vilcabamba, the empire that had once commanded the Andes was reduced to a footnote in Spanish colonial history. But let's not close the book just yet. The legacy of the Incas didn't crumble into the Andean dust. Their architectural achievements remain awe-inspiring, with Machu Picchu serving as a testament to their engineering genius. Built atop a mountain ridge, this lost city was never found by the Spanish, standing today as a reminder of a civilization that could carve its will into the landscape with the grace of a master sculptor. The Incas' influence persists in modern Peru, from the Quechua language to agricultural practices still in use today. Their terraces continue to support farming communities, and their roads, though worn, still connect remote villages. The Inca spirit lives on in the vibrant festivals, dances, and textiles that color the Andean world, proving that while you can conquer a people, you cannot erase their culture. So, what lessons do we draw from the rise and fall of the Inca Empire? Perhaps it's that even the mightiest civilizations are vulnerable to the unexpected, a reminder that history is a fickle beast, as unpredictable as an Andean weather pattern. The Incas teach us that innovation, unity, and adaptability are the cornerstones of endurance, but they also remind us of the fragility of power when faced with forces beyond one's control. As we close this chapter on the Incas, we're left with a poignant reflection on the impermanence of empires and the enduring impact of human ingenuity. History is a mirror, showing us who we were and offering glimpses of who we might become. In the Incas, we see both the heights of human achievement and the depths of our vulnerability. It's a story that continues to resonate, echoing through time like the wind across the Andes, whispering lessons for those willing to listen. Amidst the bustling chaos of 4th century Alexandria, a city where the sound of haggling merchants mingled with the chants of scholarly debates, lived a woman whose intellect was as dazzling as the Mediterranean sun. Her name, Hypatia. Not your average scholar, she was the Einstein, or perhaps the Marie Curie, of her time, minus the Nobel Prize, because those wouldn't come along for another one, 500 years or so. Alexandria was no sleepy backwater. It was a vibrant cultural cocktail, shaken, not stirred, with Egyptian, Greek, and Roman influences. You could say it was the intellectual equivalent of a triple-shot espresso. Born around 350 AD, Hypatia was the daughter of Theon, a mathematician and philosopher who probably thought bedtime stories were best told in the language of Euclidean geometry. If you wondered what kind of parent raises a daughter who becomes the most famous female philosopher of the ancient world, look no further. Theon was the guy who'd teach you Pythagoras' theorem before you could even spell theorem. But hey, if your dad's a professor at the Library of Alexandria, the era's version of Google, you might as well embrace the nerd life. Speaking of the Library of Alexandria, let's just say it was less of a library and more of an intellectual amusement park. Books, check. Lectures, double check. Philosophical debates that'd make your head spin faster than a whirling dervish. You betcha. It was the place where scholars gathered from every corner of the known world to swap ideas like they were trading baseball cards. Hypatia grew up in this academic playground, soaking up knowledge like a sponge in the Nile. By the time she was in her 20s, she was lecturing on mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, captivating crowds with her magnetic charisma and razor-sharp intellect. Her teachings were so influential that students traveled from far and wide, hoping to snag some wisdom like it was on a Black Friday sale. And while the ancient world rarely recorded women's achievements, Hypatia's brilliance was too bright to ignore. One of her known contributions was a commentary on Diophantus's Arithmetica, a work that was basically the algebra textbook of its day, minus the doodles in the margins. This was no small feat, considering that the Arithmetica was notorious for being denser than a Roman legionnaire's shield. Hypatia's elucidations helped make sense of mathematical problems that were more twisted than a Greek labyrinth. Now, let's address a persistent rumor, the supposed invention of the hydrometer. Legend has it Hypatia invented this device to measure the density of liquids. While that makes for a good story, it's about as accurate as claiming she invented the internet. The hydrometer likely existed before Hypatia's time, but she might have refined its use or explained it in a way that turned heads. This myth persists because, let's face it, the idea of her dabbling in scientific gadgets adds a nice touch to her already impressive resume. But Hypatia's contributions weren't limited to numbers and theories. She was a living symbol of the cultural melting pot that was Alexandria. Her teachings blended Greek rationalism with the mystical leanings of Egyptian thought, creating a philosophical smoothie that appealed to both pagans and Christians. It was a delicate balancing act, like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle, but Hypatia managed it with grace. Despite her achievements, Hypatia's life wasn't all academic accolades and adoring pupils. Her position as a female intellectual in a male-dominated world was about as comfortable as a bed of nails. The fact that she was respected, even revered, speaks volumes about her intellect and charisma. But as we'll see in the chapters ahead, not everyone was a fan of her free-thinking ways. So, there you have it, the early years of Hypatia, the scholarly superstar of Alexandria, who turned the city into her intellectual stage. As we move forward, the plot thickens, the stakes rise, and the vibrant streets of Alexandria become the backdrop for a story that's as compelling as it is tragic. But for now, let's tip our hats to a woman who taught us that knowledge is power, even when it means spending your childhood learning more about math than most of us ever will. As we continue our stroll through the streets of ancient Alexandria, picture Hypatia striding confidently through the Neoplatonist school like she owned the place. Because, let's face it, intellectually, she kind of did. This wasn't your average educational institution. It was the Ivy League of its time, minus the hefty tuition fees and preppy blazers. Instead, scholars wrapped themselves in togas, pondering life's great questions with a seriousness usually reserved for debates over whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Hypatia's rise to fame as a teacher here was akin to becoming a rock star in the world of philosophy and mathematics. Her classroom was like the Woodstock of intellectual festivals, attracting a fan club of eager students who hung on her every word. They flocked to her lectures on Neoplatonism, a philosophical system that combined the teachings of Plato with a dash of mystical spirituality. It was the thinking person's cocktail, stirred, not shaken, by the charismatic Hypatia herself. But let's not forget, Hypatia wasn't just waxing lyrical about the mysteries of the universe. She rolled up her sleeves and got down to the nitty-gritty of mathematics, tackling Diophantine equations like a pro. And if you're wondering what those are, think of them as the ancient world's answer to Sudoku puzzles, only a tad more complex and a whole lot less forgiving. These equations sought whole number solutions, and solving them required the kind of mental gymnastics that would put any modern-day Mensa member to shame. Hypatia's work made these mind-boggling problems a little less intimidating, guiding students through mathematical labyrinths like a seasoned tour guide. Her commentaries on Diophantus's Arithmetica turned what was once a dense mathematical tome into something more accessible, a bit like turning War and Peace into a beach read. She didn't just teach math, she translated its complexities into something her students could actually understand. And let's be honest, that's a gift not every teacher possesses. Now, while it's tempting to picture Hypatia as the ancient equivalent of a YouTube influencer, rocking the academic world with her groundbreaking content, the reality was a tad more nuanced. Being a woman in a toga-dominated world of academics was no walk in the agora. The toga, you see, wasn't just a garment. It was a symbol of a male-dominated society that often viewed women's intellectual achievements with skepticism, if not outright dismissal. Hypatia navigated these gender politics with all the finesse of a seasoned diplomat. Her wit and charisma were her weapons in this battle of the sexes, allowing her to command respect in a room full of men who might otherwise have dismissed her as a mere curiosity. She was a living testament to the power of intellect over societal prejudice, proving that a sharp mind could slice through the thickest of gender barriers. But Hypatia's rise to prominence wasn't just about personal triumph. Her success was emblematic of a broader cultural shift in Alexandria, a city that thrived on its diversity and openness to new ideas. This was a place where different cultures and philosophies intersected like the threads of a rich tapestry. Hypatia, with her unique blend of Greek rationalism and Egyptian mysticism, was the embodiment of this intersection, a living bridge between worlds. Yet, as much as we'd like to romanticize this era of intellectual flourishing, it wasn't without its shadows. The political and religious landscape of Alexandria was as turbulent as the Mediterranean on a stormy day. Tensions simmered between pagans and Christians, each vying for dominance in a city that was as politically charged as a modern-day election year. Hypatia found herself in the midst of these conflicts, gracefully balancing on a tightrope of neutrality while others around her picked sides. Despite these challenges, Hypatia's legacy as a teacher and scholar continued to grow. Her influence extended beyond the classroom, shaping the minds of future philosophers and scientists who would carry her teachings into the centuries that followed. Her story is a reminder that true brilliance transcends the boundaries of time and place, leaving a mark that endures long after the dust of history has settled. As we move ahead in our exploration of Hypatia's life, the stakes will rise even higher, and the streets of Alexandria will become the stage for a drama as compelling as any Shakespearean play. But for now, let's tip our hats once more to a woman who turned the ancient world on its head, one equation at a time. And speaking of high-stakes drama, let's dive into the social whirlpool that was Hypatia's life. You might think a scholar of her caliber would spend all her time buried in scrolls and equations, but Hypatia was no ivory tower recluse. Picture her as the intellectual Beyoncé of her day, captivating, influential, and able to navigate the social scene with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. Welcome to Alexandria, where the social and political landscape was as unpredictable as a game of Byzantine chess. At the heart of this societal board game was Hypatia, who managed to maintain friendships across a spectrum that would make a rainbow jealous. From pagans who clung to the old gods like a favorite pair of worn sandals, to Christians who were the new kids on the religious block, Hypatia's social circle was as eclectic as it was influential. One of her more famous friendships was with Orsts, the Roman governor of Alexandria. Now, Orsts wasn't just any bureaucrat. He was like the city's political rock star, responsible for keeping the peace in a metropolis as volatile as a shaken bottle of amphora wine. His correspondence with Hypatia was legendary, yet it was less about exchanging pleasantries and more about navigating the choppy waters of religious and political tension. To put it bluntly, Alexandria was a pressure cooker of religious discord. Hypatia found herself entwined in these disputes like a fly in a spider's web. The city was a battleground where pagans and Christians clashed with the fervor of rival sports teams, each side convinced they were the rightful heirs to the spiritual throne. And right in the middle, like a referee in a particularly heated soccer match, was Hypatia, balancing on the knife edge of neutrality. While it might sound like Hypatia was living in the plot of an ancient soap opera, her position was anything but enviable. Maintaining friendships across such divisive lines required the kind of diplomatic finesse that would make a United Nations ambassador look like a rookie. And yet, Hypatia pulled it off, leveraging her intellectual prowess to become a sort of bridge between worlds. Her salon-style gatherings were legendary, where intellectual heavyweights swapped ideas like they were trading secrets at a spy convention. But let's not sugarcoat it. Being friends with Orsts painted a target on Hypatia's back. In the religious tug-of-war that was Alexandria, siding with a political figure was akin to playing with fire. Enter Cyril, the ambitious and politically savvy bishop of Alexandria. Cyril was to religious politics what a shark is to a paddling pool, calculated, cunning, and always on the lookout for an opportunity. He saw an alliance with Orsts as a threat, and by extension, Hypatia became a convenient scapegoat. In a move that could rival any Machiavellian plot, Cyril's followers spread rumors that Hypatia was the one pulling Orst's strings. According to them, she was the reason Orsts resisted Cyril's ecclesiastical authority, a narrative that caught on faster than a viral tweet. This wasn't just a smear campaign. It was a strategic strike in the ongoing power struggle between the church and the state. And let's be clear, this wasn't just some historical gossip. The stakes here were as high as the lighthouse of Alexandria was tall, about 100 meters, to be precise. This was a city where religious affiliation could determine your social and political fate, and the lines were being drawn with the precision of a geometer's compass. Despite the swirling maelstrom of conflict, Hypatia remained a beacon of intellectual integrity. Her influence in Alexandria wasn't just about her academic achievements. It was about her ability to inspire and connect people across ideological divides. She was like the ancient world's answer to LinkedIn, only instead of networking for jobs, she was networking for peace and understanding. Yet, even with her formidable intellect and social finesse, Hypatia couldn't escape the turbulent tides of history. Her story is a poignant reminder that intelligence and charisma, while powerful, are not always enough to withstand the forces of fanaticism and fear. Her tragic end, which we'll delve into later, underscores the harsh reality that sometimes the brightest minds are extinguished by the darkest of times. But for now, let's not jump ahead. Hypatia's life was a masterclass in navigating the complex social dynamics of a city that was as culturally rich as it was politically unstable. She showed us that in a world full of division, bridging the gap with intellect and empathy was not just an option, it was a necessity. As we continue exploring her story, we'll see how her legacy lived on, even when the sands of time threatened to bury her memory. Her tale is far from over, and the next chapters promise to be as riveting as any ancient epic. As Hypatia's story unfolds, it becomes clear that even the brightest stars can be dimmed by the stormy clouds of politics and human folly. Alexandria, once a glittering beacon of knowledge, was now a city teetering on the edge of chaos. Picture the tension in the air as thick as the smoke from 1,000 burning scrolls, with Hypatia caught in the middle of a dangerous game of political chess between Orsts and Cyril. Orsts, the Roman governor, was Hypatia's ally, and perhaps her intellectual equal. Think of him as the guy trying to keep the party civil while everyone else is ready to flip the table. On the other hand, Cyril, the bishop of Alexandria, was a man with ambitions sharper than a Roman gladius. He was hell-bent on consolidating ecclesiastical power, viewing Orsts, and by association Hypatia, as obstacles to his divine right to rule the city. Cyril wasn't just playing politics, he was rewriting the rules of the game, and Hypatia was about to become an unwilling pawn. Now let's talk about the mob. Forget the romanticized notion of the righteous crowd standing up against tyranny. This was a mob in the truest sense, angry, faceless, and as unpredictable as a two-headed hydra. In 415 AD, fueled by rumors and religious fervor, they turned on Hypatia with a ferocity that could only be described as biblical. Imagine the scene. A throng of people whipped into a frenzy by Cyril's followers, seeking a scapegoat for their frustrations in a society cracking at the seams. Hypatia, with her pagan philosophies and her close ties to Orsts, was an easy target. On a day that must have felt like the guards themselves were absent, Hypatia was dragged from her chariot as she traveled through Alexandria's streets. Her attackers, a mob of Nitrian monks, mind you, were not the peaceful robe-wearing meditators you're picturing. These were zealots with a capital Z, and they were armed with more than just prayers. The details of her murder are as grim as they are bizarre. She was taken to a church, stripped, and brutally killed using ostraka, shards of pottery. Yes, that's right, pottery shards. It was a method as gruesome as it was symbolic, turning the tools of scholarly inscription into instruments of death. Hypatia's murder was not just a personal tragedy. It was a symbolic act of violence against the very ethos of intellectual pursuit. It marked a grim turning point for Alexandria, signaling a shift from a society that valued the light of reason to one overshadowed by religious dogma. The city that had once been a melting pot of ideas was now boiling over with intolerance, and Hypatia's death was the tipping point. But let's pause for a moment before we get swept away by the tragedy of it all. There's a tendency to cast Hypatia as a martyr for science, a narrative that's as tempting as it is simplistic. While it's true her death epitomizes the clash between old-world paganism and rising Christian fundamentalism, painting her solely as a martyr glosses over the complex, gritty reality of ancient politics and mob mentality. This wasn't a battle between good and evil. It was a power struggle, and Hypatia was caught in the crossfire. She was a victim, yes, but not of science or philosophy. She was a casualty of human ignorance and fear. In the aftermath of her death, Alexandria's intellectual glow dimmed noticeably. The Library of Alexandria, already a shadow of its former glory, seemed to wither in the wake of Hypatia's murder. Scholars who once flocked to the city's academic institutions like bees to honey began to drift away, seeking refuge in less turbulent lands. The vibrancy that had defined Alexandria was fading, replaced by the rigid structures of religious orthodoxy that Cyril so zealously promoted. And so, Hypatia's story becomes a cautionary tale about the perils of letting fanaticism drown out reason. Her life was a testament to the power of knowledge, and her death a stark reminder of what happens when the light of intellect is smothered by the darkness of extremism. As we leave this chapter of her story, let's not just remember her for how she died, but for how she lived, an intellectual giant whose legacy would inspire generations to come, even as the sands of history try to bury her memory. But hold on to your scrolls, because Hypatia's tale isn't quite finished. The story of Alexandria and the echoes of its most famous scholar reverberate through time, reminding us that while ideas can be suppressed, they can never truly be extinguished. Join me as we delve further into this ancient drama in the next chapter, where we explore the aftermath of Hypatia's death, and how her legacy continued to shape the world long after the dust of her tragic end had settled. Stay tuned. Fast forward through the annals of time, and Hypatia's legacy emerges as a beacon for those who dare to think, question, and defy the constraints of ignorance. Her story, preserved like a papyrus scroll in the minds of scholars, has been retold, reinterpreted, and at times romanticized. From the Enlightenment thinkers who saw her as the torchbearer of rational thought to modern feminist icons who hail her as a pioneer of gender equality, Hypatia has become a symbol of intellectual freedom, a timeless reminder that knowledge is humanity's most potent weapon against the forces of fanaticism. Now, let's talk about the Enlightenment, a period when Europe rediscovered its brain cells after a long medieval nap. This was the 17th and 18th centuries, a time when thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot dusted off their wigs and championed reason over superstition. Hypatia's tale was particularly appealing to them, embodying the struggle of the rational mind against the dark forces of dogma. To these philosophers, she wasn't just an ancient scholar. She was a martyr for reason, a symbol of what happens when ignorance is allowed to run riot. Quite the poster child for their cause, if you think about it. Fast forward again, and Hypatia's story takes on new dimensions with the rise of feminist thought in the 19th and 20th centuries. As women fought for their right to be heard, educated, and ultimately equal, Hypatia was elevated to the status of a feminist icon. Her very existence challenged the notion that intellectual pursuits were a male prerogative. Her life was a testament to the idea that women could, and should, occupy spaces of knowledge and power. The fact that she did so in a toga, rather than a tailored suit, only adds to her allure as a trailblazer ahead of her time. But let's not get carried away with the romanticized picture of Hypatia as a lone heroine fighting the good fight. Sure, her story is inspirational, but it's also a stark reminder of the fragility of intellectual freedom. Her death was a brutal punctuation mark on a life dedicated to learning, one that warns us of the ever-present danger of zealotry overpowering reason. Her tale, both tragic and triumphant, serves as a cautionary narrative etched into the sands of history. Never underestimate the power of a mob fueled by ignorance. And while we're myth-busting, let's dive into the idea that Hypatia was the last great scholar of the Alexandrian tradition. It's a bit of a stretch, like claiming the Beatles were the last great band to come out of Liverpool. Sure, her death marked a turning point, but the intellectual flame flickered on, albeit dimly. Scholars continued to exist, and ideas continued to percolate, but the glow of Alexandria was significantly dimmed. The city that had once been the intellectual capital of the world was now shadowed by religious orthodoxy and political instability. But hold on, Hypatia didn't just leave behind a legacy of tragedy. Her work, particularly her commentaries on mathematics and philosophy, continued to influence scholars for centuries. Her contributions to the understanding of Diophantus's Arithmetica eventually trickled down through the ages, influencing the likes of Fermat and other mathematical heavy hitters. It's a bit like how the Beatles' influence can still be heard in every teenage garage band today. Her intellectual fingerprints are everywhere, even if her name isn't always attached. As we wrap up this journey through Hypatia's life, let's step back and marvel at the broader impact of her legacy. Her story teaches us that questioning narratives isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity. In a world where misinformation spreads faster than a cat video on the internet, maintaining a critical eye on history is more important than ever. Hypatia's life is a poignant reminder that we must continually challenge the status quo, lest we become complacent in the face of ignorance. And so, we arrive at the end of our tale with a gentle nod to Hypatia, the scholar who braved the stormy seas of ancient Alexandria with nothing more than her intellect and a formidable will. In an era where the line between knowledge and belief was thinner than a papyrus scroll, her story endures as a testament to the power of the human mind. And as we close the scroll on Hypatia's story, let it serve as a reminder. Knowledge is not just power, it's survival. And while zealotry may have extinguished her earthly voice, the echo of her wisdom continues to resonate through the ages, challenging us to keep questioning, keep learning, and above all, keep the flame of reason burning bright.